Welcome back, brothers, to Lore. Tonight's story, we dive into lore of the Sons of Medusa. Before we get into madness, be sure to like, comment the videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for the support. You've been killing it. Now, let's get to the video.
Sentinel Sigma hung above Badab Primaris like a murdered moon chained in orbit. It was not beautiful. No fortress of the Imperium had been made for beauty, save by accident or arrogance, and Sentinel Sigma had been constructed for neither. It was a city of armor plate, void shield pylons, weapon shrines, and dead manufactoria fused into a single orbital bastion. Its prowed face had been wrought into the semblance of a skull by centuries of armor grafts and impact scars, the empty sockets of its observation vaults glowing with reactor fire. Around it, the void burned. Macro cannon batteries spoke from its flanks in furnace tongues. Each discharge threw a pulse of false dawn across the black, and where that light touched loyalist attack craft, ships died by the hundred. Boarding torpedoes shattered into expanding clouds of debris. Storm ravens came apart in tumbling sections, their holds opening to spill armored bodies and mortal armsmen into the airless gulf. Thunderhawks punched through the storm on columns of engine flame, and many of them died before their pilots had time to scream. Their deaths were silent in the void. That made them holier. Iron Thane Valen Cal watched the slaughter through the red wash of his helm display. Data scrolled across his sight in disciplined columns. Velocity, breach vector, plasma density, enemy turret rotation, loyalist craft loss projections. The dead were rendered as runes, then archived, then dismissed. His Thunderhawk shook as another shell burst close enough to buckle its starboard wing. Mortal crewmen died behind him, their restraints snapping as the impact hurled them into bulkheads. One broke open against the ammunition rack, bones and soft organs flattened beneath the weight of spare magazines. Cal did not turn. The loss indicator blinked amber. The machine spirit complained in Binharic distress. The pilot corrected course with hands that trembled inside his gauntlets. Cal heard the tremor in the man's breathing over the internal vox. Weak flesh, he thought. Obedient flesh, for now. Around him stood the Terminators of Atropos, locked into the mag clamps of the assault hold. They were vast in their tactical dreadnought plate, emerald and white beneath streaks of black void soot. Their armor bore the marks of long service and harsher repair, replacement vambraces, burn scars sealed with silver bonding lines, cog-toothed devotional strips nailed into ceramite, iron skulls engraved beside the sigil of Medusa. Servo motors growled in their limbs. Targeting spirits clicked and whispered. Chain fists idled with a low insectile hunger. They did not pray aloud. The Sons of Medusa had little use for words wasted before impact. Cal's own body was more relic than flesh. Beneath the layered plates of his armor, what remained of Valen Cal existed as a tolerated weakness inside a greater engine. His left arm was an augmetic weapon mount of black iron and sanctified pistons. His spine was a column of adamantine vertebrae. His ribcage had been reinforced, replaced, opened and closed so many times that the original bones were memory rather than matter. Auto-sanguinary pumps drove chemical strength through his remaining meat. Pain suppressors fed cold mercy into severed nerves. Logic engines mounted at the base of his skull monitored pulse, thought, aggression, reflex, and doctrinal purity. He was not free of flesh. He had merely reduced its authority. The Thunderhawk's forward-picked feed dissolved into static as the fortress guns struck the craft ahead of them. For an instant, Cal saw another loyalist transport vanish in white heat. The bodies inside were still alive when the pressure wave pulped them against their harnesses. Their armor survived longer than they did, spinning through the void like empty shells. "Breach in 9 heartbeats," voxed the pilot. "Correction," Cal answered. "Breach in 7. The pilot did not reply. His fear had made him slower than his instruments. The Thunderhawk hit. The world became impact, flame and tearing metal. Melter charges detonated before the prow, their shaped fury punching a wound through meters of fortress plating. The craft rammed through the softened armor, grinding itself apart as it entered. Its wings sheared away. The cockpit collapsed. Men became paste in their seats. Engine fire roared through the crew bay and washed over the terminators without moving them. The assault ramp blew open. Atmosphere screamed past them as the wounded fortress tried to vomit the intruders back into space. Cal stepped down into the breach before the pressure equalized. A mortal armsman was ripped from behind him and hurled into the jagged teeth of torn hull plating. The man struck hard enough to burst, his blood crystallizing in the thinning air as red beads across Cal's lenses. Cal's boots met enemy deck. "Advance," he voxed. "Catalog resistance. Remove it." Atropos obeyed. The sons of Medusa entered Sentinel Sigma as execution engines. Their first volley turned the breach chamber into a butchered chapel. Secessionist void troops had prepared firing lines behind barricades of plasteel crates, ammunition coffers, and dead serfs. Their discipline lasted until the first storm bolters spoke. Bolt shells struck bodies and bloomed inside them. Men did not fall so much as come undone. Chests burst outward. Helmets split and sprayed the walls with bone fragments. Arms separated at the shoulder in wet spirals. A heavy weapon team tried to bring a Lascannon to bear, and Brother Galen walked through its opening shot with his chest plate glowing, then crushed the gunner's skull between power fist and emplacement shield. The head ruptured like rotten fruit beneath sacred iron. "Left gallery," voxed Oros Nea. Cal had already seen it. Secessionist veterans in blackened void armor descended from a maintenance gantry, grav chutes flaring. Their leader carried a power saber and shouted something about Badab, honor, and defiance. The words meant nothing. Cal lifted his stormbolter and fired once. The man's torso detonated before his boots touched the deck. His saber spun away, still crackling, and impaled another traitor through the throat. The sons advanced over the dead. Their boots broke fingers, ribs, and loose weapons without pause. Where enemies still moved, they were ended. Brother Routh used a servo arm mounted over his shoulder to seize a wounded defender by the face. The claw tightened. Bone cracked. The man's limbs thrashed once, twice, then hung slack as the skull collapsed inward. Routh discarded the corpse into a pile of others and continued firing. The chamber became a corridor of meat. Mortal armsmen followed in the wake of the Terminators, or attempted to. They were naval breachers, void-hardened and armored in carapace, men trained to die in places sane soldiers would not enter. Sentinel Sigma devoured them regardless. Stubber nests hidden in the upper walls opened fire. Autogun rounds clattered from Terminator plate, but tore through the humans behind them. Men pitched forward with their backs opened. Others spun and fell, clutching at bellies that spilled through rents in their armor. Medici servitors crawled into the kill zone on jointed limbs and were immediately shredded. Human element casualties rising, voxed Lieutenant Oros Nea. His voice carried no concern, only report. Attached armsman at 67% attrition. Cal stepped over a man trying to push his intestines back inside his abdomen. The man's lips moved behind a cracked visor. No sound reached the vox. His eyes tracked Cal for half a second, pleading with the dumb animal need of the dying. "Flesh deployed into a kill zone has fulfilled its function," Cal said. "Logged," replied Nea. The suns moved deeper. Sentinel Sigma fought like a dying god. Its machine spirit howled through every conduit and lumen strip. Lights strobed in bursts of red and white. Bulkhead doors slammed shut with enough force to cut men in half. Gravity shifted without warning, trying to stagger the invaders. Fire suppression systems flooded corridors with choking chemical mist. Defense servitors woke in their wall alcoves and lurched into the passageways, with rotary cannons replacing their arms and shock mauls grafted to their spines. Cal approved of them in the abstract. Servitors were obedient. They had been relieved of opinion. Their failure was not moral, but tactical. His axe remedied it. The Omniscient weapon came alive in his fist, its edge haloed in a field of caged lightning. He met the first defense servitor at the junction of two arterial corridors. It opened fire, rounds hammering sparks from his breastplate. Cal closed the distance without haste. The axe fell. The servitor split from shoulder to pelvis, metal spine and preserved organs separating in a gush of black lubricant and dead blood. Cal twisted, brought the haft around, and smashed the next machine thrall from its tracks. "Defense pattern is layered," Naya said. "Traitor command anticipated boarding action." "Competence noted," Cal replied. "Outcome unchanged." A blast door ahead began to seal. Brother Morvain thrust his chain fist into the narrowing gap and activated the teeth. The weapon screamed against the door's inner workings. Metal peeled. Sacred mechanisms died. Morvain braced with both legs, armor servos whining as the door fought to close on him. For 3 heartbeats, the fortress tested his strength. Then the chain fist bit through the locking spine, and the door sagged open. Beyond it waited a killing hall. Heavy stubbers, plasma guns, grenade launchers and Lascanon teams filled the far end behind layered barricades. Above them hung the banners of the secessionists, scorched and ragged, marked with defiant heraldry that had ceased to matter the moment Imperial judgment reached orbit. Their officers had chained gun thralls to the walls, each man hardwired into a weapon mount. Some still had eyes, some did not. Their mouths were open in permanent screams around feeding tubes and restraint bits. "Contact mass significant," said Naya. "Insufficient," said Cal. The defenders fired. The corridor vanished under a storm of light and explosive force. Plasma bursts splashed across Terminator plate, burning emerald armor white. Lascanon beams cut molten wounds into the walls. Grenades burst among the advancing suns, filling the passage with shrapnel and body fragments from the mortal armsmen still trying to keep pace. Brother Galen took a Lascanon strike through the abdomen. The shot punched clean through his plate and blew cooked flesh across the warrior behind him. He staggered, systems venting. His life signs dipped, corrected, dipped again. "Apothecarian request," voxed Galen. "Gene seed risk." "Denied," Cal said. There was no pause in Galen's reply. "Acknowledged." He kept walking. Cal felt no pride. Pride was an organic indulgence. He felt the clean alignment of doctrine and action. A wounded warrior remained a weapon until the objective was secured. Recovery before victory was sentiment. Sentiment was corrosion. "Main plasma coupling access lies below this deck," Naya reported. "Route blocked by entrenched resistance. Then resistance is the route." The suns fired as they advanced. Devastator elements entered from a parallel breach, their heavy weapons turning the killing hall into an abattoir furnace. Multi-melter beams reduced barricades to slag and cooked the men behind them inside their armor. Heavy bolters hammered gun thralls into pulp, still attached to the walls by their cables. Plasma cannons burst among clustered defenders, transforming disciplined squads into steam, ash, and wet fragments that slapped against the ceiling and rained back down. Cal reached the first barricade. A secessionist officer rose before him with a power sword in both hands. The man was brave. His armor was ornate. His face was scarred by prior wars. He had likely killed many men and believed this history granted him weight. Cal's axe took his sword arm at the elbow. The return stroke opened him from hip to collar. The officer fell in 2 directions. Cal stepped through the space he had occupied. "Your resistance is recorded," Cal said to the dying men around him. "It has been found wanting." They descended through the fortress by way of ammunition lifts and maintenance shafts wide enough to accommodate cargo walkers. The deeper they went, the louder the machine spirit became. It screamed in the language of abused metal. It shrieked through pressure valves. It begged through flickering lumen banks. It cursed through malfunctioning organodes. Cal listened without sympathy. A machine that served traitors had forfeited its sanctity until conquered, purified, or destroyed. Heat increased with every level. The walls sweated condensation and oil. Plasma conduits ran behind armored glass, each one pulsing with caged starfire. The deck trembled beneath the discharge rhythm of the fortress guns. Every pulse meant more loyalist craft annihilated outside. Every delay meant more resources spent before the true assault on Badab Primaris could begin. "Time loss exceeds optimal projection," said Naya. "Corrective violence authorized," Cal answered. They reached the lower vault approaches and found the last mortal armsman dying there. The attached breacher squads had tried to force a secondary passage. The fortress had closed around them. Some had been pinned beneath collapsed gantries. Others had been burned down to blackened shapes by vented plasma runoff. A few still fought from behind wrecked cargo haulers, firing into darkness at enemies Cal could not yet see. One man turned as the suns approached, his visor cracked, half his face visible beneath it. He lifted a trembling hand in salute. "Lord Astartes," he rasped over an open channel. "We held the turn." Cal looked past him to the sealed vault door beyond. "You occupied enemy attention for 112 heartbeats," Cal said. "Your function was useful." The man laughed once, or sobbed. It was hard to tell. Then a round struck him through the back of the skull and painted the inside of his visor red. The Suns answered with extermination. They pushed into the vault guard chamber, and the defenders waiting there were not common troops. Secessionist elite infantry and void, hardened plate stood in disciplined ranks beneath the glow of emergency shrines. Their armor bore kill markings from loyalist campaigns. Their weapons were clean. Their fear responses were suppressed by combat narcotics or conviction. Beside them waited combat servitors, plated in black iron, their torsos swollen with ammunition drums, their faces hidden beneath welded masks. Along the walls hung corrupted gun thralls, men and machine fused into the fortress by crude augmetics, their rib cages opened and bolted to weapon cradles, their lungs pumping around cables like pale bellows. Behind them rose the plasma couplings. They were immense. 5-meter-thick pillars of armored conduit descended from the vaulted ceiling into the reactor cradle below, each one filled with contained sunfire feeding the macro cannon batteries above. They pulsed with blue-white radiance, bathing the chamber in the glow of a star imprisoned and enslaved. Damage them incorrectly, and half the fortress would become a new sun for less than a second. Damage them correctly, and Sentinel Sigma would be blinded, muted, and broken. Cal stepped into the chamber. Enemy weapons rose. The sons of Medusa formed around him in a half-circle of iron, emerald, and bone-white plate. Brother Galen stood among them, one hand pressed to the wound in his abdomen, the other keeping his stormbolter level. Naya moved to Cal's right, chain fist purring. Devastators locked their firing lines, Terminators braced, machine spirits growled in their housings, eager for sanction. The traitor commander at the far end lifted his blade. "For Badab," he began. Cal raised his omniscient axe. His voice entered the voxnet, cold as void shadow, flat as a death sentence, sanctified by hatred and stripped of all mercy. "Purge the weak." The Imperium did not break in a single hour. It cracked by doctrine, by pride, by signal delay, and by the slow rot of distance. It cracked in the silence between astropathic choirs, in the contradictory decrees of rival authorities, in the holy impatience of men who believed that terror had become too remote to command them. Segmentum after segmentum heard different truths. Planetary governors swore fealty to masters who named themselves lawful. Battle fleets turned their prows away from old allies and opened fire in the name of obedience to new ones. Administratum scribes sealed entire systems beneath wax and parchment and declared them traitor, compliant, disputed, lost, or sanctified, often within the same decade. It was the age of the Nova Terra Interregnum, and mankind devoured itself with the appetite of a starving god. The Adeptus Mechanicus did not stand apart from the madness. It sank its iron fingers into the schism and found its own reflection staring back from the data depths. Forge worlds argued in Binharic hymns. Explorator fleets returned with corrupted interpretations of ancient lore. Magi of Mars condemned lesser forges for doctrinal drift, while hiding their own deviations inside encrypted catechisms. Tech priests, who had shared centuries of sacred calculation, began to lock their noospheric gates against one another. Then, Moiraan spoke. The Forge world lay beneath a sky the color of burnt copper. Its cities were not cities as flesh-born men understood them, but layered continents of industry. Manufactoria climbed into the soot clouds like cathedrals to function. Plasma stacks burned without pause. Conveyor shrines carried raw ore, corpse starch, promethium, ammunition, replacement limbs, war engine components, and skulls stamped with purity seals through tunnels large enough to swallow regiments. Rivers of coolant ran through channels cut into black iron. The faithful did not walk there. They processed. In the deepest sanctums of Moiraan, beneath vaults where the air was too hot for unaugmented lungs, the tech mystics listened to the stars. They listened through machines older than dynasties. They listened through astropathic echo vaults, through orbital auger crowns, through predictive engines fed by the dying fluctuations of the Astronomicon. Every pulse of the Emperor's light was recorded. Every tremor in that impossible beacon was compared against casualty rolls, warp storm births, crusade failures, forge output, tithe collapse, demonic manifestation, and the murmuring static of half-dead machine spirits. The Magi of Moiraan did not hear noise. They heard language. They claimed that the Omnissiah spoke through pattern. They claimed that the God Emperor and the Machine God were not divided, but reflected across the same impossible equation. They claimed the Astronomicon was not merely a beacon, but a wound of divine calculation, bleeding truth into the void for those with sufficient sanctity and sufficient processing power to understand it. They claimed that the future could be approached, not by sorcery, but by sacred prediction. Not prophecy of the witch, but prophecy of the machine. Their first gospel was not written in ink. It was burned into data crystal and sealed inside a prayer engine. The second was transmitted in bursts of Binharic cant through maintenance shrines. The third was spoken aloud by a magos, whose throat had been replaced with an organ pipe array, and whose voice killed 3 unaugmented attendants through harmonic rupture. After that, the creed spread faster than fire. It moved through forged shrines as litany. It moved through Titan crews as whispered confirmation of omens already feared. Moderati saw the war ghosts on their command thrones flicker in patterns matching Moiraan predictions. Princeps dreamed in machine code and woke with scrap lines of forbidden calculus carved into their own flesh by servo limbs they did not remember commanding. Tech guard cohorts painted new sigils beneath approved Martian markings. Engine seers attached to imperial armies altered battlefield prayers by a single phrase, then another, until entire regiments marched under vehicles blessed by Moiraan doctrine without knowing the name of their infection. Data vaults changed. Access permissions rewrote themselves. Cherubim servitors sang canticles not uploaded by any authorized priest. Forge bells rang at hours no chronometer recorded. Machine spirits accepted Moiraan prayers and returned efficiency increases too precise to dismiss. Orthodox Mars saw corruption in the miracle. Mars did not panic. Panic was a sin of unstable flesh. Mars calculated threat, traced transmission vectors, identified doctrinal rot, and prepared rectification. The fleets came in silence. They translated at the edge of the system in perfect formation, their hulls black against the furnace glare of Moira's sun. Arc Mechanicus vessels drifted at the center like iron continents, surrounded by cruisers, mass conveyors, kill ships, Skitarii assault carriers, and coffin barges filled with battle servitors awaiting activation. Their prows bore the sigils of Mars, pure and red, crowned with the skull of the machine god.
Their weapon batteries were already warm. Moiraan answered with hymns. The first exchange of fire turned the orbital manufactoria into rings of molten debris. Defense platforms died under lance strike and macro shell, their crews still chanting the Cinder Gospel as atmosphere vented and bodies crystallized in the void. Moiraan ships burned with reactor hearts exposed, their death throes spilling scrap code across the noosphere like blood in water. Mars closed all channels except one. Submit to deletion, submit to correction, submit to the mercy of the true machine god. Moiraan refused. The bombardment lasted long enough to become weather. Manufactoria opened like butchered organs. Hab stacks collapsed into molten foundations. Plasma reactors ruptured and flung white fire into districts measured in
leagues. The ground split. Rivers of coolant flashed to steam, then fell again as toxic rain. Soot buried the lower shrines until their spires jutted like black teeth from ash dunes. Millions died without ever seeing the enemy, crushed in work lines, boiled in sealed chambers, vaporized at their stations, or left fused to the machines they had served since childhood. Then the Skitarii landed. They came in red and brass, in cohorts without fear, without mercy, without hesitation. Their galvanic rifles spat blue murder across the forge avenues. Radium carbines poisoned the air until unsealed flesh sloughed from bone. Vanguard maniples advanced through the heat shimmer, their robes snapping in furnace winds, their optics bright with targeting runes. Behind them rolled battle automata, fists wet with crushed bodies, phosphor weapons turning crowds into screaming light. Schismatic forge workers fought back with mining lasers, rivet guns, plasma cutters, and the desperate hatred of believers watching their god murdered by priests. They died in heaps. Skitarii butchered them among conveyor lines and beneath statues of the Omnissiah. Servo skulls drifted above the carnage, their speakers clicking as they recited execution warrants for men, machines, subsects, fabrication orders, and entire bloodlines. By writ of Mars, by purity of doctrine, by the unbroken calculus. Deleted, deleted, deleted. In the data cloisters, the deaths were slower. Priests hardwired into their altars refused disconnection even as rectification teams burned through the blast doors. The cloisters were cathedral vaults of black glass and copper nerve line, every wall alive with sacred information. Moiraan magi hung from the ceiling in amniotic thrones, spines fused to cable trees, skulls opened to receive divine arithmetic. They sang the Cinder Gospel through static as Mars entered with flamers. Promethium washed across them. Their flesh burned, their robes burned, their exposed organs tightened and split in the heat. Some remained alive by augmentation alone, jawbones clicking, lenses cracking, metal fingers tapping final code into altar keys as their bodies became candles. Others tried to crawl after being severed from their thrones, dragging loops of intestine, optic cable, and charred mechadendrites through rivers of coolant turned black by ash and fat. Combat servitors stamped them flat. Skitarii alphas marked the vaults for erasure. But data did not die as men died. It fractured, it hid, it multiplied in ruin. Fragments of the Moiraan creed escaped in prayer engines sealed inside reliquary torpedoes. Fragments rode the last astropathic screams of dying choirs, braided into pain, madness, and light. Fragments buried themselves in damaged noospheric vaults beneath collapsed forge stacks, sleeping in corrupted memory cells while Mars marched overhead. Fragments passed into tech priests who cut out their own vocalizers rather than recant, preserving the prophecy behind locked thoughts and pain wards. Fragments entered battle-damaged titans whose princeps never again trusted silence. Moiraan burned, but the creed endured. Years passed, then decades, then longer. The Imperium's wound festered. The doctrinal ash of Moiraan drifted far from the dead forge and settled where iron minds were most vulnerable to its shape. The iron hands had always stood close to the Mechanicus. Among the sons of Ferrus Manus, flesh was a weakness to be overcome, endured only until excised. They honored iron, calculation, endurance, and contempt for frailty. Their clans carried war engines like relics and treated the forge as both weapon and shrine. To many among them, Martian orthodoxy was not foreign law, but a second skeleton beneath chapter doctrine. When the Moiraan fragments reached them, some rejected the creed as corruption. Some heard only the hiss of dead heresy. Others heard the rhythm beneath it. Others heard truth. The debate began in sealed chambers aboard clan vessels and within the iron halls of Medusa's sons. It did not begin with shouting. The iron hands did not indulge such waste. It began with disputation, with logic chains, with doctrinal comparison, with old grudges given clean mechanical language. It spread into armories, apothecarian vaults, reclusium alcoves, and forge temples, where battle brothers came for the replacement of failed flesh. Iron Father Cetol Solix stood at the center of the infection, if infection it was. He was already more machine than man. His left eye was a cluster of rotating lenses set deep into a skull reinforced with black iron. One arm remained flesh, though little of it could be seen beneath bonding plates and subdermal cable. The other was a forged limb of segmented steel, ending in manipulator claws, precise enough to repair a bolter's firing pin, and strong enough to tear open a traitor's chest. Mechadendrites rose behind him, like the limbs of a predatory engine. His voice carried the flat resonance of vox grills and old tombs. He had studied the surviving Moiraan calculus longer than any sane warrior would have allowed. Sanity did not concern him. Accuracy did. In the strategium of the strike cruiser, Gorgon's Dew, Solix stood before the hololithic representation of dead Moirae. The forge world rotated in miniature, a sphere of black cinder and red fault lines. Around the table stood warriors of the chapter, Iron Fathers, clan commanders, veterans with faces of scar tissue and chrome. None knelt, none gestured. Their anger was too controlled to need motion. "The pattern is heresy," said Iron Father Kargul. His vox voice was harsh from battlefield damage never repaired. "Mars judged it. Mars burned it. The matter is concluded." "Judgment is not proof," Solix replied. "It is authority. Authority is not proof." A silence followed. It had weight. Men had died for less. Kargul's servo fingers flexed once. "You place dead Moirae above Mars. I place verified pattern above inherited comfort. The creed speaks of unity between the Emperor and the machine god beyond sanctioned interpretation. The creed identifies convergence. The creed predicts through the Astronomicon. The Astronomicon exists. It fluctuates. Fluctuation produces pattern. Pattern may be read by witches, by machines, Solix said. One of the captains leaned forward, his face pale around augmetic cheek plates. "You would gamble the purity of the chapter on ash scraps and forbidden computation." Solix turned his lens cluster toward him. "Purity that cannot survive examination is contamination wearing ceremonial plating." No blade was drawn, no bolter was raised. The iron hands did not need violence to make a chamber lethal. Kargul spoke again. "Mars named Moirae apostate." "Mars destroyed Moirae," said Solix. "Destruction proves strength. It does not prove correctness. You sound like a priest of the dead forge. I sound like iron refusing rust." A younger warrior, flesh still visible along one side of his jaw, spoke from the edge of the hololith. "And if this path leads to censure?" Solix regarded him for several seconds, measuring more than his words. "Then censure will be endured. If it leads to exile, then exile will be weaponized. If it leads to war, then war will clarify." The hololith flickered. Every warrior saw it. Dead Moirae stuttered in the air, its ruined surface dissolving into streams of green code. The strategium systems had been isolated. The noospheric wards had been triple sealed. No external signal should have entered. No machine spirit should have spoken without invocation. Solix did not move. The code unfolded across his lenses. It entered his augmetics like a blade drawn through water. For one moment, he saw not the dead forge, not the chamber, not the iron faces of his brothers, but a future burning in fragments. He saw iron hands turning from iron hands. He saw old clan markings scraped from plate. He saw ships departing without blessing. He saw warriors who would not be called renegade, yet would never again be fully welcomed home. He saw green and white armor beneath cold stars. He saw 3 war clans standing where one wound had been. He saw a fortress of asteroids in a dead system. He saw Badab burning. He saw an orbital skull split open by boarding fire. He saw an axe lifted before conduits fat with captured sunflame. And at the edge of the vision, he saw a name. Not spoken, not yet earned, not yet granted by terror, Mars, Medusa, or war. A name made from exile, cinder, iron, and refusal. Solix's remaining flesh hand closed slowly into a fist. Kargul watched him. What did you see? Setol Solix turned from the corpse light of Moiraan. Our future, he said. The gene vaults were never silent. Even in their deepest hours, when no apothecary walked the Iron Isles and no serf dared breathe without sanction, the vaults spoke in pulses, hums, clicks and whispers of cold preservation. Suspensor fields trembled around reliquary tanks. Cryogenic banks exhaled frost that rolled low across adamantine decking. Stasis locks blinked with green lumen eyes. Brass warding plates carried the names of the fallen in script so small that only an Astartes helm lens could honor them properly. Here lay the future of the Iron Hands, not in banners, not in battle honors, not in the memories of the dead. Those were ornaments, useful only when they strengthened function. The future lay suspended in sealed cylinders, guarded by layered blast doors, oath locks, machine spirits, and brothers willing to kill for purity. Gene seed was lineage made flesh. It was ferrous manus in fragments, carried from one slaughter to the next. It was the chapter beyond the mortality of any warrior. To corrupt it was to reach backward into the Primarch and forward into every son yet unborn. That was why both sides had come armed. Setol Solix stood before the inner gate of the vault, with 27 Moiraan adherents at his back. Their armor bore the black and iron of the old clans, though new sigils had begun to appear beneath purity seals and overscored heraldry. Cog teeth, cinder marks, the half-hidden glyph of dead Moiraan, etched where only brothers would see it. Their bolters were held low, but every weapon spirit was awake. Every targeting rune had chosen a brother. Across the vault, Nave stood the Orthodox. Clan Raukan held the central line, broad-shouldered and still, their plates scarred by wars fought under older certainties. Beside them stood warriors from allied clans, Iron Fathers, apothecaries, and veteran sergeants, whose faces had been cut down to harsh planes of scar tissue and steel. Their weapons were held in the same position, low, ready, denial given form. Between the two lines, the frost crawled over the floor and gathered around boots that had once advanced together. No one shouted, no one cursed. Rage existed, but it had been compressed into discipline until it became something harder than anger. It became intent. Iron Father Kargul stood at the center of the Orthodox line. His helm hung at his hip. Half his skull was bare metal, set with black optical nodes that rotated and clicked as they measured every movement from Solix and his followers. The remaining flesh of his face was grey and tight, as if offended by its own survival. "You will withdraw from the vault threshold," Kargul said. Solix's lens cluster focused with a soft mechanical whir. Negative. The gene seed is not yours to reinterpret. It belongs to the chapter. You seek to make future warriors kneel before a dead forge. I seek to prevent future warriors inheriting your hesitation. Several bolters rose by the width of a finger, not enough to be called escalation, enough to be understood. The vault machine spirits sensed the strain. Warning runes glowed along the upper walls. Auto-turrets unfolded from concealed housings, their barrels turning in slow arcs, unable to decide which half of the chapter represented trespass. The apothecaries had sealed the inner gene chambers when the first Moiraan force approached, but Solix had brought code keys, forge writs, and logic prayers older than the present feud. He had not come to desecrate the vaults. In his own calculation, he had come to preserve them from weakness. Behind him, Brother Dalmor carried a reliquary casket intended for gene samples. Its surface was engraved with the binary verses of Moiraan. Brother Tethox had connected a data spike to the threshold panel, coaxing the locks with whispered Binharik. At his feet lay the body of a chapter serf who had refused access. The man's neck had been broken cleanly. His death had been efficient, almost gentle, and that made it worse. Kargul looked at the corpse, then back to Solix. "You have killed within the vault precinct." The serf obstructed lawful correction. He obeyed his charge. He obeyed incomplete truth. The Moiraan creed is not truth. Then disprove it. Mars disproved it with fire. Solix tilted his head. Fire disproves only the survival of what burns. The words passed through the chamber like a shell that had not yet detonated. Many of the Orthodox hated him then. Some had hated him before. A few feared him, not because he was mad. Madness would have been easier to dismiss. Cetol Solix was not frothing with revelation. He was not shaking beneath the ecstasy of forbidden belief. He was calm, brilliant, exacting, and utterly convinced that those who opposed him were not evil, merely inferior in calculation. That made him dangerous beyond heresy. Kargul's voice lowered. "You would alter selection rites. We would refine them. You would place the Moiraan thesis into hypno-indoctrination. We would correct incomplete catechisms. You would test aspirants for adherence before full implantation. We would ensure future iron is not poured into flawed molds. You would bind belief to blood." Solix's remaining organic eye narrowed, an expression almost too human to survive on his face. "Belief is already bound to blood. You merely object to the doctrine. You mistake corruption for revelation. You mistake fear for caution. You mistake yourself for a prophet. No." Solix's voice became colder. "Prophecy is the superstition of men who cannot read pattern. I am not a prophet. I am a witness to calculation." A rune flashed red on the gene vault door. Brother Tethox had breached the first ward. The Orthodox line moved as one. Bolters came up, chain blades unlocked, servo arms lifted over the shoulders of Iron Fathers like scorpion tails. The Moiraan adherents matched them. For a single breath, the Iron Hands stood on the edge of murdering themselves in the place where their unborn brothers slept. Every warrior there understood the consequence. One bolt shell would not simply kill a brother. It would divide the chapter into wounds that no apothecary could close. It would make Medusa drink the blood of its own sons. It would turn the old truth of iron against itself, until only rust remained. Solix did not lower his weapon. Kargul did not either. The inner vault alarms began their dirge, deep, slow, funereal. Then the great clan council entered. They came through the nave's upper doors without haste, escorted by honor guards whose weapons remained mag-locked to their backs. Old warriors, Iron Fathers, clan lords, dreadnought ancients borne upon grav platforms, their sarcophagi wired into the judgment engines of the chamber. Their presence carried the weight of centuries and the cold authority of those who had seen lesser feuds strangled before they became wars. The eldest among them spoke through a vox grill set into a body almost entirely replaced by shrine steel. "Stand down." No one moved. The elder's optics brightened. "This is not counsel. This is command." Kargul lowered his bolter first. Solix lowered his a moment later. That moment was noted by every warrior present. The judgment did not come quickly. Iron Hands did not indulge haste in matters of structural failure. The council sealed the gene vaults under triple oath and dragged the dispute into halls of black iron where the air smelled of oil, incense, and old executions. For 7 days, no clan vessel translated, no warrior was permitted to deploy, no Moiraan adherent was left unguarded, no orthodox accuser was permitted near the accused without witness. Arguments were made as weapons. The Orthodox declared that doctrine outside sanctioned Martian, and chapter law was corruption wearing a machine mask. They invoked the burning of Moirae, the decrees of Mars, the danger to gene seed, the obscene arrogance of predicting the Emperor's will through unstable light. They said that flesh was weak, yes, but that the weakness of flesh did not justify the weakness of error. Solix answered each point with logic chains, battle records, augur correlations, and the names of wars the Moiraan calculations had predicted before official astropathic confirmation. He did not plead. He did not ask forgiveness. He said that indecision was not wisdom. He said that the chapter's hatred of flesh meant nothing if the mind remained soft. He said that fear of doctrinal refinement was a meat-born reflex. He said the true heresy was to recognize weakness and then preserve it because tradition had given it a name. The machine does not ask whether the flawed component feels shame, Solix told the council. It removes the flawed component. It replaces. It improves. It endures. The elder in steel asked him, "And if the component is your brother?" Solix answered without pause, "Then I mourn the inefficiency of his failure after correction is complete." There were warriors who nearly reached for blades at that. There were others who heard only purity. The council withdrew. The chapter waited. When judgment came, it came as iron always came, without comfort. Civil war would not be permitted. The gene vaults would remain inviolate. The Moiraan adherents would not be executed, for their loyalty to the Imperium could not be disproved by accusation alone, and their battlefield service stood recorded in blood and victory. They would not remain, for their doctrine had become a fracture line through the chapter's skeleton. They would depart. All who held to the Moiraan creed would leave the fortress spaces of the Iron Hands. They would surrender claim to clan armories beyond their personal war gear, relinquish rights of command within the parent chapter, and depart under oath. The orthodox clans would not pursue. The exiles would not raise arms against those they left behind. No brother would spill the blood of another over dead Moirae, not while enemies of mankind still lived to receive that hatred. The oath was spoken in the hall of severance. Fully 1/3 of the Iron Hands stood with Setol Solix. They filled the hall from wall to wall, a sea of black iron, white lenses, and silent judgment. Veterans, tech marines, apothecaries, line brothers, dreadnoughts who had chosen exile from within sarcophagi older than many clan ships. Their number was a wound made visible. The Orthodox watched from the opposite side, and none could pretend the chapter had not been diminished. Successor brethren came as well, drawn by old pacts, shared blood and private conviction. Some arrived in small ships with no heraldry broadcasting, unwilling to shame their own chapters openly, but unwilling to abandon what they believed. They were admitted into the departing brotherhood after scrutiny, oath-binding, and the surrender of prior claims. No embrace welcomed them. No feast marked their arrival. Their names were entered, their weapons counted, their usefulness assessed. The stripping of heraldry began at the 9th bell. No blade touched the old markings in anger. That would have implied spite, and spite was flesh noise. The Moiraan Iron Hands removed their clan icons with scrapers, acid, plasma chisels, and polishing stones. Black armor lost old identity by degrees. Clan Raukan hands, old campaign badges, honor stripes, oath seals, and forge rights vanished beneath raw ceramite and exposed primer. Some warriors cut too deep, leaving scars in their plate that would never be fully smoothed. Others carved away only what law required and left ghost lines beneath new paint, memory reduced to texture. Solix removed his own clan mark last. He held the severed plate fragment in his augmetic hand. The symbol caught the chamber light for one final second before his servo claws closed. The metal folded, cracked, became scrap. He dropped it into a brazier of blue flame. No one mourned aloud. The exiles catalogued what they had lost: brothers, forge access, gene vault proximity, armory rights, home territories, the comfort of legitimacy, the ability to speak the name Iron Hands without qualification in certain halls. The loss register was long. It was precise. It was entered into memory engines aboard the departing fleet and sealed beneath Solix's personal cipher. Then they calculated future war. Their ships departed without music. Strike cruisers, escorts, forge tenders, and supply vessels broke from the parent fleet one by one, their engines burning cold blue against Medusa's distant wrath. Orthodox vessels held position and watched them leave. Weapon batteries remained dormant. Target locks were forbidden, though several machine spirits begged for them. The oath held. On the bridge of the cruiser, Ferrum Ultima, Solix stood before the forward oculus and watched the world of old allegiance shrink behind them. The bridge crew was silent. Servitors clicked in their pits. Tech priests murmured Binharic root prayers. Exiled warriors stood at command stations that had not yet learned new heraldry. Brother Dalmor approached. His old clan markings had been replaced by bare black plate. We have no formal mandate. We have purpose. We have no fortress monastery. We have ships. We have no chapter name. We have iron.
And enemies?
Solix turned from the oculus. The Imperium has never lacked those. Their first war as exiles began before the bitterness of departure had cooled. A distress transmission reached them from an Imperial mining world on the edge of a disputed subsector, where an apostate governor had broken tithe, murdered administratum envoys, and opened his manufactoria to mutant labor cults. The local garrison had failed. The planetary defense force had divided. Loyalist enclaves were being processed in furnace pits as examples to those who still honored terror. The exiles translated in system without announcing their lineage. They struck before the governor's astropaths finished screaming warning. Drop pods fell through polluted cloud banks like meteors of judgment. Thunderhawks burned over refinery spires. The first bastion died under melter fire. The second was crushed beneath a landing dreadnought whose sarcophagus hymn drowned out the governor's broadcasts. Mutant levies charged through chemical fog and were cut apart in ranks, their bodies bursting under disciplined bolter fire, their blood steaming on toxin-hot earth. Solix led the strike on the palace forge. The governor had fortified himself within a cathedral of industry, surrounded by oath-breaker soldiers, slave engines and priests who had replaced imperial scripture with their own declarations of sovereignty. Solix advanced through the main gate behind a wall of fire. His axe split the governor's champion from crown to pelvis. His servo limb seized a screaming preacher and drove him face first into a turning gear assembly, where the man's skull and doctrine vanished together. When the governor was dragged before him, fat, shaking, wrapped in medals he had not earned, he tried to speak of negotiation. Solix listened for 3 words, decided there would be no useful intelligence, and shot him through the mouth. By the next dawn, the world transmitted compliance. The tithe schedules resumed. The furnace pits were emptied of loyalist dead and filled with rebels. The exiles took no tribute beyond ammunition, fuel, and the right to depart without delay. An imperial commander sent thanks through the astropathic choir and asked what name should be entered into the record. Solix stood amid the ruins of the palace forge, his armor blackened by soot, his old heraldry gone, his followers gathered behind him like weapons awaiting designation. They were not renegades. They had fired upon no loyal brother. They were not supplicants. They would kneel to no pity. They were not broken remnants, no matter what the orthodox would whisper in iron halls. He looked upon the corpse heaps, the restored tithe engines, the manufactoria burning clean, and saw the shape of the future sharpened by a fraction. "Record this," he said. "We are the true inheritors of Medusa's iron truth." The great cull did not begin with banners. It began with lists. Worlds declared contaminated. Fleets marked unreliable. Governors named apostate. Magi condemned by red-sealed writ. Regiments erased from the rolls before the last men wearing their colours had finished dying. Across the wounded Imperium, scribes in windowless halls scratched out names with iron styluses, while crusade fleets burned those names from the stars. The war was called correction by those who survived it. Those who died beneath it had no permission to name it anything at all. Cetal Solix and his exiles entered that age as unwanted instruments. No triumphal hymns greeted their ships. No cherubims scattered parchment blessings across their embarkation decks. Their fleet moved between war zones under the gaze of suspicion. Mechanicus observers watched their rights from behind sealed optics. Imperial commanders accepted their aid, with expressions hidden behind rebreathers and command helms, as though gratitude itself might be contagious. Other Adeptus Astartes regarded them with the cold stillness of brothers who saw too much resemblance and not enough obedience. They were useful. That was the only reason they were tolerated. Solix considered usefulness sufficient. He stood aboard the Ferrum Ultima, while the fleet translated into real space above the industrial moon of Val Teeth. The moon filled the forward oculus, swollen and diseased, its surface hidden beneath rad storms and manufactorum smoke. It had once fed forge worlds with armor plate, drive chains, reactor shielding, and macro shell casings. Now its tithe ships drifted silent in orbit, their holds packed with butchered administratum envoys, their hulls daubed in litanies written by apostate hands. The apostate magi had taken the moon without open rebellion at first. They had altered labor schedules, rewritten obedience canticles, modified ration dispensers with compliance narcotics, and replaced overseers with sermon engines. By the time imperial authority understood the corruption, billions of labor thralls had been converted into a planetary militia. Men who had once stamped rivets into tank hulls now marched with welding masks bolted to their faces and shock pikes in their hands. Assembly lines produced autoguns instead of engine brackets. Foundries poured armor for rebel crawlers. Children born in the smoke vaults were taken to the data chapels and returned with cranial plugs and empty eyes. The moon was not lost to madness. It was organized. That made it worse. Adeptus Mechanicus rectification forces had failed to take the equatorial manufactoria. Astra Militarum regiments had died in trenches their own laborers had dug. Naval bombardment could not crack the deep forges without destroying the production capacity Terra wished reclaimed. A council of mortal officers had spent 9 standard days arguing over acceptable loss projections. Solix ended the argument by arriving. The imperial commander assigned to the theatre was General Halbrecht Vaughan, a hard old man whose face had been ruined by augmetic reconstruction after a shell had taken his jaw and one eye. He met Solix aboard the command bastion built into the carcass of a grounded mass conveyor. Around them, staff officers whispered over hololiths while artillery reports rolled through vox banks like thunder. Vaughan looked up at the Iron Father and did not bow. That much Solix permitted himself to respect. "You are late," the general said through a bronze vox grill mounted where his mouth had been. Solix's lenses clicked. "Your assault timetable was built on false assumptions. We arrived at the first useful hour. My men have held the outer trenches for 36 days. Then they have performed adequately. 36 days of dead men buying you your useful hour. Dead men buy all hours in the Imperium." Vaughan's remaining eye hardened. "Can you take the moon?" Incorrect question. Then correct it. Ask what of the moon must survive. The general stared at him for a long moment. Around the chamber, mortal officers pretended not to listen. 2 Mechanicus observers stood beneath a cogitator shrine, their red robes dark with oil-warding runes, their optics fixed upon Solix as if they hoped to detect heresy in the angle of his stillness. Vaughn turned to the hololith. The equatorial manufactoria must be reclaimed. The primary plasma mills, the macro shell presses, the orbital lift engines, and the southern reactor cathedra are priority assets. The Administratum wants production restored within 6 months. The Administratum is not present. I am. You are also not relevant to doctrinal necessity. The general's augmetic jaw clicked once. Those manufactoria are worth more than every soldier on this moon. Then your soldiers were incorrectly valued. Vaughn's hand curled against the edge of the hololith table. He might have been angry. He might have been restraining fear. Flesh made both expressions similar. Solix touched the moon's image with one steel claw. Red runes appeared across the equatorial belt. Not objectives. Kill marks. The infrastructure is contaminated beyond efficient reclamation. Apostate magi have rewritten control spirits, seeded machine cant with corruption, and bound labor populations to rebellion through chemical, neural, and ritual dependency. We will advance through the northern trench belts, sever command nodes, destroy the primary data altars, and collapse the manufactoria cores. Vaughn's voice dropped. Collapse them. Yes, that is not liberation. It is correction. You would sacrifice millions of Imperial assets. Solix turned his iron face toward him. Flawed iron must be melted before it can be reforged. No one spoke after that. The assault began under a sky the color of old blood. Radstorms crawled across Val Teeth in green sheets, hissing over armor, eating exposed skin, making the dead glow faintly in the trenches. The exiles deployed through it in armored spearheads. Land raiders ground down from the drop zones with their machine spirits growling hymns of contempt. Predators and vindicators moved in their wake, their hulls scarred by previous wars and marked only by stripped heraldry and new iron sigils not yet recognized by any Imperial archive. Dreadnoughts strode between them like walking reliquaries of judgment, sarcophagus lenses burning white through the storm. The labor militia rose to meet them. They came in numbers that would have drowned mortal armies. They poured from trench mouths, ventilation shafts, loading yards, and furnace tunnels. Men in industrial rags and scrap plate advanced shoulder to shoulder, shock collars sparking against their necks, their faces hidden behind welded masks. Some carried autoguns, some carried chain hooks, some carried blasting charges clutched to their chests with both hands, chanting through vox implants as they ran. The first rank died at 900 meters. Heavy bolters opened from the land raiders and turned the front of the horde into red vapor and spinning meat. Explosive shells walked through the mob in disciplined lines. Bodies burst apart so quickly that the men behind them vanished inside mist made from their comrades. Legs kicked without torsos. Heads struck the mud and rolled beneath tank treads. The second rank climbed over the first and died the same way. The exiles did not cheer. They did not quicken. Advance by measured fire, Solix voxed. No deviation, no mercy expenditure beyond ammunition. Brother Dalmor answered from the left spearhead. Resistance is dense. Density permits efficiency. The land raiders entered the trench belts. Their tracks crushed men, barricades, weapon teams, and wounded alike. The trenches were too narrow for the machines, so the machines widened them with their own mass. Earthworks collapsed. Militia trapped beneath the tracks screamed until steel and weight pressed the sound from them. Rebel gunners fired from dugouts with lascannons and plasma cutters, scoring armor, burning paint, killing one transport in a gout of reactor flame. The exiles disembarked from the burning vehicle before its ammunition cooked off, walking through the fire as if emerging from a forge. Solix led the central thrust on foot. A militia wave broke against him at close range. Their shock pikes sparked across his plate. A chain hook bit into his shoulder guard and snapped. One rebel clambered onto his back, trying to drive a mining drill into the joints of his armor. A mechadendrite rose, coiled around the man's spine, and crushed until bone, pack, and ribcage collapsed together. Solix flung the corpse into 3 others, and split the nearest with his axe. The omniscient weapon did not merely cut, it pronounced failure. Men opened before it. Armor peeled. Organs flashed in the rad light and spilled steaming onto the mud. Solix struck without flourish, each blow chosen by angle, force, and necessity. A rebel officer fired a plasma pistol at him and burned away part of his abdominal plate. Solix crossed the distance, seized the man's head in one augmetic hand, and tightened until the helm folded inward with a wet metallic pop. Command strand severed, he voxed. Confirmed, came Dalmor. Militia cohesion degrading. Degrading did not mean stopping. The labor thralls kept coming, because the apostate magi had built obedience deeper than fear. Behind the trenches, sermon towers thundered through the storm, broadcasting machine hymns twisted into commands. Run, kill, die, feed the furnaces, praise the new calculus. The words struck the mind as much as the ear. Mortal guard regiments pinned on the flanks began to falter, some men vomiting blood from the sonic pressure, others clawing at their helmets until commissars shot them back into obedience. The exiles moved to silence the towers. Devastators took position atop a ridge of slag and corpses. Their multi-melters burned through shrine plating. Missile launchers punched down Vox spires. Plasma cannons fired into the tower throats and turned the chanting engines into columns of incandescent ruin. When the final sermon tower fell, the militia screamed, not in defiance, in sudden awareness. For a brief span, billions across the moon understood what had been done to them. Then the suns continued killing them. No order of surrender was transmitted. No quarter code was released. The population had been weaponized, corrupted, conditioned, and spent. To Solix, pity for them would have been pity for a jammed autoloader or a cracked barrel. Regret did not repair the fault. Removal did. By the 2nd day, the northern trenches were gone. By the 4th, the outer manufactoria burned. By the 8th, the apostate magi retreated into the primary plasma mills, dragging with them their data altars, elite forge guard, and thousands of bound tech thralls. The mills were a continent of smokestacks, conveyor fortresses, coolant lakes and cathedral engines, all shuddering around reactor hearts sunk deep into the moon's crust. Every path into the complex had been mined. Every bridge had been chained with gun servitors. Every wall carried the faces of dead loyalists nailed into steel as warnings. The exiles attacked at dawn, though dawn on Val Teeth was only a paler shade of poison. Drop pods struck the upper gantries, while land raiders breached the lower gates. Dreadnoughts smashed through assembly halls. Tactical squads cleared conveyor lines with bolter and flamer. The fighting became close, filthy, and industrial. Men died in stamping presses. Servitors were blown apart among cogitator banks. Tech thralls continued firing after losing limbs, their bodies dragged forward by crude augmetics until headshots ended them. Apostate priests crawled through maintenance ducts, chanting binary curses, only to be hauled out and dismembered by servo arms. Solix reached the central data altar beneath the largest plasma mill. The apostate magos awaited him there, suspended in a lattice of cables above a pit of blue fire. His body had been expanded with stolen machines until little remained of the original priest, but a face stretched across a brass mask and a spine pulsing inside glass tubing. Around him, bound laborers knelt in rings, their skulls wired into the altar, their brains used as wet cogitators. Some wept, some recited production quotas, some begged the machine god to kill them. The magos opened a channel. "Brother of iron," it crooned, "you smell of Moiraan." Solix halted, His warriors raised weapons. The chamber waited. "You misidentify me," Solix said. "The Cinder Code clings to you. The Dead Forge speaks in your silence. Mars should have burned deeper." Solix's axe hummed. Mars lacked precision. The apostate laughed through 100 speakers, then joined precision to revelation. "We are not enemies. We are deviations from the same rusted tyranny." Solix looked at the bound laborers, at the altar, at the corrupted plasma controls, at the magos who believed similarity was kinship. "You are rot," he said. The exiles opened fire. The chamber became thunder and organ spray. Bolter rounds burst the kneeling wet cogitators one by one, painting the altar with the contents of their skulls. Plasma fire cut through cable lattices. The magos screamed as his supporting limbs failed and his swollen body dropped toward the pit. Solix leapt onto the altar, drove his axe into the priest's chest assembly, and pinned him against the brass frame. "Your doctrine," the magos hissed. "What is it, Exile?" "Function." Solix tore him apart and cast the pieces into the plasma below. The mills could have been reclaimed. Not cleanly, not quickly, not without decades of purification, millions of servitor hours, and the risk of scrap code surviving in some sealed nerve of the complex. The Administratum wanted them preserved. The Mechanicus observers wanted them examined. General Vaughn wanted the moon's industrial value intact enough to justify the dead. Solix ordered reactor collapse. The moon shook for 3 hours. The equatorial manufactoria did not explode at once. They died like a chain of tortured suns. Plasma mills ruptured in sequence. Conveyor cities lifted from their foundations. Cooling seas boiled upward in columns of toxic steam. Entire districts sank into orange cracks, opening across the crust. The rebel armies still trapped inside became ash before they knew heat had touched them. The data altars vanished. The production lines vanished. The corrupted machine spirits were silenced beneath fire, hot enough to make memory meaningless. From orbit, the moon wore a burning belt. General Vaughn sent a protest before the last reactor died. Solix received it in the strategium, surrounded by casualty. Ledgers, ammunition tallies, and gene seed recovery reports. The general's hololithic image flickered, distorted by radiation bloom rising from the murdered manufactoria. "You have crippled Imperial production across this subsector," Vaughn said. "I have prevented corrupted production from continuing. You destroyed what we came to save." "No, I destroyed what made saving inefficient. You are not liberators." Solix regarded the image. "Correct." The transmission ended. The wars continued. The exiles became a rumor spoken with distaste and need. On one world, they killed a rebel priesthood by collapsing the hive spire in which it preached, burying 9 million citizens to ensure 8 heretics died without escape. On another, they teleported into a command cathedral and executed every officer above the rank of colonel before the first loyalist tank had crossed the border. They purged bunker networks with rad gas, destroyed astropathic relays rather than risk false surrender, and cut out enemy command structures with such merciless clarity that campaigns predicted to last years ended in weeks. Suspicion did not fade. It became irrelevant. Their brutality won too cleanly to ignore. Their casualty ratios were exemplary. Their gene seed remained pure under examination. Their oaths to the Emperor did not fracture. Their contempt for weakness killed traitors faster than the doubts of their allies could restrain them. At last, terror spoke. The decree came across sanctioned channels under seals of such authority that even Mars did not interrupt it. The exiles assembled aboard the Ferrum Ultima to hear it, not in celebration, but because recognition was a logistical event requiring witness. Solix stood before his gathered warriors in the Hall of Iron Continuance. Around him were brothers who had left Medusa without certainty of future, who had scraped old clan marks from their plate, who had spent themselves across the great cull as proof made manifest. The proclamation named their service. It named their origin without forgiveness. It named their loyalty without affection. By special edict of the High Lords of Terror, in the 11th year of the 37th millennium, the fleet-born exiles were ratified as a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. The name granted was the name the dead vision had promised, Sons of Medusa. No cheer followed. No warrior struck fist to breastplate in joy. No hymn rose from the hall. The name settled upon them like a weapon placed into a waiting hand. Brother Dalmor turned to Solix. Recognition is achieved. Recognition is recorded, Solix corrected. What is our first decree? Solix looked upon the warriors before him. No longer merely exiles, not forgiven, not embraced, not clean in the eyes of all who watched them, but ratified, functional, armed with legitimacy and sharpened by rejection. Carve this into adamantine, he said. Let it stand in every forge, every vault, every arming chamber, and every place where future brothers are made. The engraving engines awoke. Solix spoke the words, and the chapter received them without warmth, without doubt, without mercy. Weakness is death. The asteroid did not turn like a world. It drifted like a weapon awaiting command. Tylus was not a fortress in the shape of a monastery. It was a chain of hollowed iron stones, bound by void bridges, docking spines, armored causeways and defense grids that had been cut into dead rock with patient hatred. Each asteroid carried a function. One was a forge, one was an armory, one was a reliquary, one was a gene vault, one was a tomb for dreadnoughts, whose sarcophagi were wired into command systems so that the ancient dead could dream in tactical projections. Between them crawled shuttles, servitor barges, ammunition haulers, and gun platforms whose machine spirits watched the void with predatory hunger. The aspirants called it a home only once. They were corrected after that. Cadron had been taken from a mining clan whose name had been removed from his memory during the first night of hypno-indoctrination. He remembered pressure suits, iron dust, low gravity, and hunger. He remembered his father only as a broad shadow with cracked knuckles. He remembered fear of the dark between the stars. Then the engines had taken those memories apart and filed them into uselessness. The sons of Medusa had no need for sons who longed backward. He walked now in a line of other aspirants through the asteroid forge of Tylus, naked except for restraint collars, identification brands, and the scars of prior trials. The floor was black iron and warm enough to blister soft feet. The air tasted of machine oil, cauterized meat, and old incense. Servo skulls drifted above them, clicking picked captures. Chapter serfs with shaved heads and dead eyes stood beside the walls with shock mauls. None spoke. Speaking without purpose wasted oxygen and attention. Ahead of the line waited the gate of the Chamber Ferrum. It was not a chamber alone, despite the name. It was an order within the chapter, a brotherhood of tech marines, forge rights, artificers, red-armored keepers of material, and black-robed machine priests, bound by oath to the sons of Medusa. The Chamber Ferrum held the chapter together, where pride might have pulled it apart. It counted ammunition. It rationed sacred armor. It maintained the strike cruisers, repaired the land raiders, sanctified the dreadnought sarcophagi, and watched the apothecarian with eyes no flesh-born physician could evade. It guarded secrets older than the chapter name. It stood between the war clans and ensured none mistook independence for fracture. Above the gate, carved into adamantine, were the words Cetol Solix had given them. Weakness is death. Cadron had read them every day since his arrival. The words had ceased to be a warning. They had become weather. A forge right stepped from the gate's shadow. He was not as vast as the battle brothers who ruled the fortress, but he carried their authority in every movement. His armor was the red of Mars darkened by emerald plates and white heraldic bone. Mechadendrites rose from his back, each tipped with tool, blade, injector, drill, or delicate manipulator. One half of his face remained organic, stretched thin around metal implants. The other half was polished steel, with a green lens set where an eye had once failed. You have passed pain response trial, void exposure trial, and preliminary combat calculus, the Forge Rite said. His voice entered their collars and skulls at once, a command rather than sound. Passing is not achievement, it is continuation. Continuation is permitted until failure manifests. One aspirant 2 places ahead of Cadron swallowed. The movement was small. The Forge Rite's lens turned toward him. Fear response elevated. The aspirant tried to still himself. Too late. A mechadendrite snapped forward and struck the side of his neck. The boy convulsed, collapsing to the heated floor. His limbs hammered against the iron with a noise like dropped tools. Foam crawled between his teeth. No one moved to help him. Cadron looked forward, because the last aspirant who had looked at a fallen candidate had been blinded in one eye as correction. The Forge Rite watched the seizure end. "Recovered?" asked a serf. "Unnecessary," said the Forge Rite. "Mark for conversion." 2 servitors emerged from an alcove. They lifted the twitching aspirant and carried him away through a side hatch. The boy's eyes were open. He knew. That made his silence worse. The line moved on. Inside the Chamber Ferrum's outer trial vaults, the aspirants were divided beneath hanging cages of surgical instruments. Cadron was bound upright to an iron frame. Needles entered his spine. Electrodes kissed his temples. A vox grill descended before his face and began to recite battle cant, gene lineages, armor marks, weapon rights, treachery classifications, kill priority tables, and the doctrinal divisions of the chapter: Magyara, Atropos, Lachesis. The names pulsed into him between bursts of pain. Magyara, whose warriors favored relentless battle line advance, grinding assault and disciplined fury behind the sanctity of heavy fire. Atropos, whose sons struck like the cutting edge of a machine blade, armored, brutal and decisive, severing the enemy's most vital organs. Lachesis, whose companies mastered calculated response, support warfare, pursuit, containment, and the patient starvation of resistance. Each war clan bore its own heraldic variations, its own honors, its own internal hierarchy of battle companies, tactical companies, and support companies. Each bent the chapter's doctrine into a different weapon shape. Above all of them sat no single chapter master. The era of Solix had passed into iron memory, and with it, the danger of one will, becoming too close to fleshly monarchy. The sons of Medusa had chosen the council of 3 iron thanes, 1 for each war clan, 3 voices, 3 calculations, 3 blades meeting at the same throat. No sentiment of kingship, no ornamental lord above function. Authority distributed, measured, tested, and counterweighted like load across a bridge. Cadron learned this, while pain engines opened his nerves and fed fire into them. The machine did not ask whether he understood. It demanded retention. When his thoughts drifted, the current increased. When his pulse spiked, the collar tightened. When he tried to remember his father's shadow, a burst of white agony erased the image. By the end of the session, he could recite the known iron thanes, the command logic of the war clans, and the maintenance rights of a bolt gun's feed assembly, while blood dripped from his nose onto his chest. "Define flesh," said the Forge Rite. Cadron's mouth moved before his will fully returned. "Flesh is the temporary vessel of gene seed and command. Define weakness, the persistence of failure after recognition. Define mercy." His mind searched. Pain flickered, ready. "Mercy is the preservation of inefficiency." The Forge Rite's lens narrowed by a fraction. Acceptable. In another vault, aspirants failed. One screamed too long under the pain engines. One answered a combat equation with an instinctive charge where enfilade withdrawal would have preserved ammunition and achieved superior kill ratio. One tried to save another during vacuum exposure when the trial required completion of the objective beacon before retrieval. Compassion had delayed him by 6 seconds. The airlock opened on both. Their bodies swelled, shook and burst in red threads around the eyes before pressure loss took their voices. One survived the exposure, but emerged blind, skin blackened, lungs frozen and useless. He was also marked for conversion. Failed recruits were not buried on Tylus. Burial honored a completed life. Failure was not completion. Failure was material waiting for correction. Cadron saw the conversion chamber after the 5th trial. He had been sent to carry ammunition crates with other surviving aspirants, a labor task inserted between trials to test obedience under exhaustion. The route took them along a gantry above the servitor manufactorum. There, beneath green lumens and iron cranes, failed boys were remade. The aspirant who had shown fear in the line lay on a surgical slab. His skull had been opened. His limbs were restrained. His eyes moved wildly in the ruin of his face as chirurgeon arms descended. No chaplain spoke comfort. No apothecary administered mercy. Needles pumped sedatives, paralytics, and memory corrosives into his blood. A drill entered the exposed bone. Grey matter twitched. Silver probes slid deeper, searching for the parts of him that still believed they were a person. Cadron stopped walking. A shock maul struck him between the shoulder blades and dropped him to one knee. "Observe or move," said the serf. "Do not hesitate." So Cadron observed. The failed aspirant wept without sound as his mind was scraped down. Fear went first, or perhaps identity. The eyes stopped begging. The mouth slackened. A steel collar was riveted to his spine. His arms were removed and replaced with lifting limbs. His legs would be cut down later, the Forge Rite explained from behind Cadron, as if continuing a lesson already begun. "Flesh is not evil because it is sinful," the Forge Rite said. Cadron did not turn. He watched the boy become equipment. "Flesh is evil because it fails. It bleeds, it tires, it fears, it lies to preserve itself. It calls weakness sorrow and demands witness. Iron does not weep when reforged." Below, the failed aspirant's chest rose once, then again, then settled into mechanical rhythm as the first obedience engine took command of his lungs. "Will he remember?" Cadron asked. The question left his mouth before wisdom could kill it. The Forge Rite considered him. One mechadendrite rose, the blade tip hovering beside Cadron's eye. "Memory is inefficient for his function." "Then he is dead." "No. Death wastes potential. He has been corrected." The blade withdrew. Cadron understood then that mercy was not absent among the sons of Medusa because they had forgotten it. Mercy had been found, measured, condemned, and deliberately removed. What remained was cleaner. Above the trial vaults, the chapter prepared for war. Cadron saw only fragments, but fragments were enough. Through armor glass, he watched Atropos Terminators march into embarkation cages, their armor white and emerald beneath strips of black, their chain fists hanging like execution verdicts at their sides. Devastator squads of Magyara knelt in weapon shrines, while serfs anointed heavy bolters with oil and ash. Lachesis tech marines reviewed ammunition tithes beside rows of predators and whirlwinds, their noospheric exchanges too rapid for unaugmented minds. Dreadnoughts were awakened by ritual impact upon sarcophagus plating. Strike cruisers drank fuel from umbilical towers. Macro shells passed along conveyor tracks like iron coffins for enemy cities. Spiritual life and battle doctrine were the same machine. A war rite was a maintenance cycle. A prayer was a targeting correction. A hymn was a calibration sequence. Every oath tightened the chapter's grip around a future victim. The aspirants were marched from observation into the final trial of the cycle. The mining tunnels beneath Tylus had not been fully pacified when the suns first claimed them. Some had been left deliberately unstable, mapped but unlit, seeded with auto-turrets, failed servitors, rad pockets, pressure traps, and old mining machines whose spirits had grown feral in darkness. The aspirants were given blades with dull edges, empty pistols with a single round hidden in one random weapon, cracked auspex slates, and one objective beacon. They were told to survive until retrieval. They were not told that retrieval would come only for the one who activated the beacon. Cadran entered the tunnel with 8 others. By the first hour, one had been taken by an ore grinder that started without warning and pulled him in feet first. His screams echoed long after his body had become slurry beneath the teeth. By the second, another stepped into a rad pocket and began vomiting black blood into his hands. The rest left him because the auspex said forward and the beacon signal was moving. By the third, 2 aspirants killed each other over a blade with a sharper tip. Cadran did not take part. He watched. He counted breaths. He tracked echoes. He learned who moved with anger and who moved with calculation. The strongest among them was Vorek, a broad-shouldered boy from some gravity-crushed mining hold, already muscled beyond the others, with hands large enough to close around Cadran's throat and end him quickly. Vorek found the beacon first, in a chamber of broken drill rigs and hanging chains. He laughed when he saw it, a wet animal sound of triumph, and struck down the nearest aspirant with a length of pipe. The boy's skull broke against a rock outcrop. Blood ran into the dust. Cadran remained in the dark beyond the chamber. He had found the pistol. It had been empty. That had been useful information. It meant every other aspirant might still believe it was loaded. Vorek saw him and grinned. "Come out." Cadran stepped into view with the pistol raised. Vorek hesitated. Not long. Long enough. Cadran threw the pistol, not at Vorek's face, but at the chain above him. The impact dislodged a rusted hook assembly Cadran had loosened while waiting in the dark. Vorek looked up too late. The hook fell, not enough to kill him, but enough to smash his shoulder and drive him to one knee. Cadran was already moving. He did not attack the throat. Vorek expected that. He attacked the knee from the side with a stone chisel taken from a dead tool rack. Cartilage gave. Vorek roared and swung. Cadran let the blow catch his ribs because the angle made it survivable, then drove the chisel into Vorek's open mouth. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to blind him with pain and choke him on blood. Vorek thrashed. Cadran circled behind, wrapped a length of cable around his neck, braced both feet against his back, and pulled until the stronger boy's movements became less powerful, then less frequent, then irrelevant. He held the cable longer than necessary. Only after Vorek stopped moving did Cadran activate the beacon. The hatch opened above him 7 minutes later. Light stabbed down into the chamber. The Forge Right descended on a grav platform with 2 armed serfs and a servo skull. His lens moved from the corpse to the pistol, to the chain, to the broken knee, to Cadran's bleeding ribs. "You killed a physically superior candidate." Cadran stood over Vorek's body. His breath hurt. His hands shook, but he hid them by tightening them into fists. "Yes. With misdirection, terrain manipulation, and delayed force application. Yes. You did not challenge strength with strength. No. State reason." Cadran looked at the dead boy who had been stronger, faster, more openly brave, and now functionally useless. Strength was his asset. I denied it function. The Forge Right was silent for several heartbeats. Then he inclined his steel face by the smallest measure. Efficiency noted. The Bellwrath Crusade began as all Imperial Crusades began, with ink, blood, oath, and lies. The parchment decrees named it Liberation. The priests named it Divine Reclamation. The Lord Generals named it Theatre Stabilization. The Munitorum named it an expenditure of acceptable magnitude. The men who marched beneath its banners had other names for it, most of them spoken through broken teeth, torn lungs, and mouths filling with the ash of worlds. The Lana Rifts did not want mankind. They were a wound of stars and dead systems, a chain of broken planets and mineral corpses scattered through tides of radiation and warp scar. Their suns burned badly, their moons were skeletal, their void lanes shifted with malicious frequency, as though the immaterium itself disliked the passage of ordered fleets. There were forge outposts there, tithe stations, pilgrim cairns, mining colonies, dead expeditionary bastions, and shrines built to saints whose bones had never reached Terra. Every one of them had been swallowed, starved, corrupted, or left screaming into silence. Then the Crusade came. More than 25 million Astra Militarum soldiers were thrown into the rifts in the first great mustering, and more followed after them in waves of flesh and steel. Regiments from hive worlds, death worlds, shrine worlds, fortress moons and polluted agri hells came in their millions, packed into troop conveyors, where disease killed thousands before the enemy saw a single laser gun. Titan legions walked from their coffin ships beneath banners the size of hab blocks. Knight households swore chain-blade oaths beneath cathedral engines. Pilgrims came too, because wherever the Imperium made war, the faithful followed to die in the footprints of giants. Merchants came, corpse guilds came, penitent mobs came dragging their own gallows behind them, hangers-on, scribes, remembrancers, relic sellers, rattlings, confessors, sanctioned killers, oath-bound medici, and corpse starch factors all trailed after the armada like flies around a battlefield wound. 8 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes would be recorded across the long span of the Crusade. Among them, the sons of Medusa were never the most beloved. They became the most requested, not by men of conscience, not by commanders who wished to preserve worlds, not by priests seeking symbols of mercy or exemplars of saintly wrath. The sons were requested when resistance no longer resembled a military problem and had become an equation that devoured every softer answer. When trench lines ate regiments, when Xenos tunnels birthed horrors beneath command bastions, when Manufactoria could not be retaken without risking infection, when generals ran out of words and priests ran out of martyrs, they sent for the sons of Iron Exile. They did not come as saviors, they came as correction. Iron Thane Morn Gravar of Atropos stood upon the command deck of the strike cruiser Ferrum Judicant as the Crusade fleet burned above the dead world of Heraxis Vale. The planet below had once been a mining colony, then a fortress, then a grave. Now its crust heaved in slow convulsions, cracked by something alive beneath it. Across the ash continents, the lines of the Astra Militarum glittered like wire wounds. Trenches cut the land from horizon to horizon. Artillery bastions fired without pause. Titan footfalls appeared from orbit as slow flashes through storm cover. Every few minutes, orbital debris fell through the atmosphere in burning trails, the wreckage of dead ships descending like cathedrals set aflame. Gravar watched without awe. His face had almost no flesh remaining. A strip of grey skin survived along the right cheek, stretched tight around implanted reinforcement bars. The rest was emerald lens, black iron jaw, polished cranial plating, and vox grill. Where lungs had once laboured, pressure engines now breathed for him. Where a heart had once beaten, redundant pumps measured his blood by function rather than rhythm. His armour bore the green and white of the chapter, the black severity of Atropos, and the scars of wars no mortal historian had survived to misrecord. A mortal Lord Marshal stood beside him, bundled in a greatcoat decorated with campaign medals. The man's name was Adrast Gol, and he had lost 3 armies in the rifts before learning to speak to the sons of Medusa without requesting kindness. The primary Helgramite hive city lies under the Cantic Plain, Gol said, gesturing to the hololith. Our Auspex arrays suggest a layered structure. Chitin, alloy, resin, organics, unknown engine mass. The upper trench sectors are compromised. The 69th Mordant, the 300th Brimlock, and elements of the Vardan Armoured have failed to withdraw. Gravar's optics clicked through the projection. Failed or refused. Communications are fractured. Some are still fighting. Then they have not failed completely. Goal swallowed. There are survivors in the lower trench belt. Extraction windows exist. Incorrect. The Lord Marshal glanced up. Extraction windows exist in theory, Gravar continued. Execution would require diversion of armor, delay of subterranean assault, increased exposure to synaps counterattack, and unacceptable time loss. They are Imperial Guardsmen. They are material already committed. Goal's jaw tightened. He had learned enough not to argue morality with a son of Medusa. He tried strategy instead. If abandoned, they become biomass for the enemy. Gravar looked down at the lower trench runes blinking amber on the hololith. His voice did not change. Then they will be denied to the enemy. The order went out 6 minutes later. Sealed kill zones. Saturation fire. No extraction. On the planet below, the lower trench belt became a furnace. Basilisk batteries adjusted elevation and fired until their barrels glowed. Wyverns hammered the communication trenches with shrieking fragmentation storms. Loyalist guardsmen still alive in the mud looked upward as their own artillery found them. Some died instantly. Others were shredded in waves, their flak armor bursting open, their rifles vanishing beneath sprays of mud and blood. Men dragged themselves through ash slurry with legs missing and helmets full of screams. Commissars fired mercy rounds until the barrage took them as well. Vox operators transmitted prayers, curses, grid references and pleas, all of it lost beneath the storm. The Hellgramites feeding through the trenches died with them. They came apart badly. The Xenos were wrong things, insectile and mechanical, each creature a lattice of chitin plates, copper tendons, wet cogwork and mandibles that clicked in binary mimicry. Their blood was dark resin threaded with metallic flecks. Smaller strains swarmed in floods, climbing over one another in glittering carpets of claw and hunger. Larger forms rose on jointed legs, their backs carrying weapon cysts that spat bone shards at rifle velocity. Some wore the fused remnants of human armor in their growths, not as trophies, but because the hive cities digested battlefields and remade what they consumed. The bombardment smashed them into twitching heaps. It also sealed every living man of the abandoned regiments beneath fire and collapsing earth. Gravar watched the kill zone darken from amber to black. "Proceed," he said. The suns descended by drop pod, storm raven, and subterranean assault drill. Atropos led. Devastators deployed in coffin-tight formations amid the upper trenches, their heavy weapons coming alive before the dust of impact had settled. Dreadnoughts followed, ancient warriors entombed in walking sarcophagi, each stride crushing ash, bone and spent shell casing beneath adamantine feet. Tactical squads secured the breach craters with bolter fire. Tech marines drove seismic augers into the crust and listened to the planet's diseased heartbeat. The Hellgramite hive city answered from below. The ground opened. Entire trench sections dropped into darkness. Guardsmen, corpses, sandbags, artillery pieces and burning tanks slid into the widening mouths. From beneath rose heat and the stench of acid resin. The first Xenos wave emerged from the sinkholes in a screaming climb. Chitin, bodies layered so densely that they appeared as one moving wall. Lasergun fire flashed from terrified Imperial lines. Men fired until power cells burned their hands. Hellgramites reached them, and the line dissolved into close slaughter. Gravar advanced through it. His storm bolter worked in calm bursts. Each shell entered the alien wall and detonated, throwing fragments of chitin, resin, and twitching limb across the trench lip. Around him, Atropos Terminators walked with the certainty of siege towers. Chain fists tore open heavy strains. Power fists crushed thorax plates into paste. Servo arms seized Xenos skull clusters and twisted until the internal machinery sheared. When smaller creatures climbed their armor, the Terminators burned them off with wrist flamers, filling the air with the stink of boiled resin. Subterranean aperture stable, voxed Brother Halvek from the foremost drill team. "Depth?" asked Gravar. "Uncertain. The hive is not excavated into the crust. It has replaced the crust." "Clarify." "The world is hollowing itself around the organism." Gravar processed that. "Then we remove its organs." The suns entered the digestion tunnels beneath Heraxis Vale. The walls pulsed. They were not stone, though stone remained in places like bones inside a tumor. The tunnels were chitin and muscle, latticed with metal veins and ribbed conduits that breathed hot vapor. Resin coated the floor, thick enough to slow even power-armored boots. Here and there, human bodies were fused into the walls. Guardsmen, serfs, pilots, priests, entire command squads pressed flat beneath translucent amber, their faces preserved in the moment of understanding. Some were dead, some were not. Their eyes moved as the suns passed. No warrior stopped. A fused soldier whispered through a cracked vox bead embedded in the resin. "Lord Astartes, mercy!" Brother Halvek raised his bolter. Gravar did not object. The shot burst the man's skull inside the resin and fogged the amber red. "Mercy logged," Halvek said. "Advance," replied Gravar. The tunnels fought back, not merely the creatures inside them, but the structure itself. Apertures opened in the walls and vomited acid. Tendrils snapped from ceiling vents, wrapping around armor joints, dragging warriors toward grinding sphincter mouths, lined with metal teeth. The floor flexed beneath dreadnought weight, trying to swallow them. Vox signals degraded into static, filled with false Binharic whispers. The Hellgramites had learned from the machines they consumed. They answered Auspex sweeps with counterfeit returns. They mimicked Imperial distress codes. They played the voices of dead guardsmen over the squad channel until Gravar ordered all non-command audio purged. Atropos continued in silence. The first synapse forge lay beneath a kilometer of crust, though distance meant little in that labyrinth. It was a cathedral womb, an immense chamber where the walls fed into a central engine of bone, brass, and living nerve tissue. Hellgramite young hung in resin sacks from the ceiling, millions of them, each twitching around a metal spine growing through its body. At the center, synapse queens clung to the forge engine like priests to an altar, their bloated heads crowned with antennae that pulsed command through the hive. The devastators formed ranks on the chamber lip. "Fire discipline," Gravar said. "Plasma to synapse bodies, melter to support veins, seismic charges to lower spine, dreadnoughts forward." The Hellgramites sensed death and threw themselves upward. They came in a living avalanche. The young sacks burst overhead, spilling half-grown things that landed shrieking among the suns. Acid mist filled the chamber. Chitin claws scraped ceramite. A devastator lost his left arm beneath a wave of blade limbs and continued firing one-handed until a brother stepped in front of him and burned the swarm from his body. Dreadnought Ancient Cardameus charged into the mass with a roar of machine rage, his assault cannon reducing the Xeno's carpet to shredded fragments, while his power claw pulped larger strains against the chamber floor.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Plasma cannons fired. The chamber became blue-white murder. Synapse queens exploded in fountains of resin and neural fluid. Melter beams cut the support veins and sent rivers of molten alloy down the forge walls. Seismic charges were planted under covering fire, each one blessed by a Techmarine in a Binharic cant too fast for mortal language. When the charges detonated, the lower spine of the forge shattered. The sound was colossal. The synapse forge collapsed inward. The living walls convulsed. Millions of Hellgramite young screamed at once as their sacks tore free and fell into the reactor pit below. The dreadnoughts withdrew through a curtain of falling flesh and metal. One vanished beneath the collapsing structure, his sarcophagus signal continuing to transmit battle hymns until static swallowed him. Gravar marked his loss. Nothing more. Above ground, Titans walked through the ash storm. The Legio Cordax engine Invictus Malignum strode across the Cantic plain, with void shields flaring under Hellgramite bioartillery. Its princeps, Lord Arkham Vald, was wired into the God Engine by nerve and throne, his mind stretched across plasma reactors, volcano cannon, apocalypse launcher, and adamantine stride. Around the Titan's ankles, guard regiments advanced and disappeared, swallowed by trenches, shell bursts, Xenos counter-tunnels, and clouds of corrosive spores. 1,000 men died every time the Titan took a step in the wrong direction. 1,000 more died when it took a step in the right one. War at that scale did not measure itself in lives. It measured itself in ground. By the end of the third subterranean assault, the front line had moved 4 kilometers. The Munitorum called it decisive progress. The dead could not object. Gravar's forces broke the second and third synaps forges over the next 9 days. The fourth required the detonation of a captured Prometheum reservoir, which killed 2 guard divisions still marked as active on the Lord Marshal's rolls. The fifth lay beneath a pilgrim redoubt, where 300,000 faithful had gathered around the bones of a saint whose authenticity had been disputed for 4 centuries. Gravar ordered the redoubt shelled flat to open the descent path. The saint's bones, authentic or otherwise, burned with the rest. At the 6th forge, the Hellgramites counterattacked through the corpses of the dead. They had digested enough human tissue to build mockeries. Things wearing the shapes of guardsmen came stumbling from side tunnels, their skins stretched over chitin frames, their mouths opening to release clouds of biting larvae. Some still wore dog tags. Some still carried laser guns fused to their palms. One saluted before its abdomen split and birthed a swarm into the face of a Sons of Medusa serf team. The serfs died screaming as the larvae ate through their eyes, tongues, and soft palate. The Astartes burned them all before the infestation could spread. Enemy adaptation noted, Brother Halvek said. Noted and irrelevant, Gravar replied. The 6th forge died under melter fire. The 7th died beneath the tread of dreadnoughts. The 8th was too large to assault conventionally. It pulsed beneath the Cantic Plain like a second heart, feeding every surviving hive strand across the continent. It was protected by living bastions, resin armor, biomechanical artillery nests, and trench systems made from the bones of those who had died, taking the first kilometer of ground. The Crusade Command asked whether the Sons could break it. Gravar answered with requisitions: ammunition, seismic warheads, plasma cells, rad warding, replacement drill heads, sarcophagus recovery teams. No speech of glory, no vow of sacrifice, no oath before the assembled lords. Function required supply, not theater. The final assault lasted 17 hours. From orbit, the battlefield looked as if a continent had been opened with a knife. Titans fired into the storm until their reactor ghosts bled heat into the sky. Guard regiments advanced behind them in blocks of exhausted humanity, laser guns flashing in sheets, banners burning, commissars dying beside the men they had threatened into courage. Space Marine forces struck at secondary nodes. Artillery erased valleys. Orbital debris fell among the lines and crushed friend and foe alike. Beneath it all, the Sons of Medusa entered the Underworld one last time. They reached the prime Synaps Forge by walking through the dead Hellgramites, dead guardsmen, dead servitors, dead pilgrims, dead brothers, their gene seed already taken, their armor marked for recovery if time permitted. The chamber that housed the prime forge was vast enough to hold a hive district. Its ceiling vanished into darkness. Its floor was a lake of resin studded with half-digested tanks. The central organism rose from that lake like a cathedral built by insects who had dreamed of machines. It saw them without eyes. It hated them without soul. Gravar led the charge. The Sons did not roar. They did not need to. Their weapons spoke with greater honesty. Plasma fire tore blue wounds through the forge body. Melter beams bored into its supporting pylons. Dreadnoughts waded into the resin lake and fought things that rose around them like drowning nightmares. One ancient was dragged under by a dozen massive Hellgrammite warforms and detonated his reactor rather than be consumed. The explosion turned half the lake to fire. Gravar reached the base of the central organism and drove a seismic warhead into its living engine housing with his own hands. The Hellgrammites screamed through every tunnel in the world. Gravar armed the charge. "Withdrawal path compromised," voxed Halvek. "Then cut a new one." They did, with bolter, chainfist, axe, and the bodies of brothers who died standing. When the prime forge detonated, Heraxis Vale shook hard enough to break mountains already dead for millions of years. Across the Cantic Plain, Hellgrammite tunnel networks collapsed in sequence. Hive towers sank. Biomechanical artillery nests ruptured. Xenos swarms lost coordination and became meat for the guard guns. The Lana rifts did not fall silent, but for the first time in decades, one world stopped screaming in the enemy's voice. The Crusade called it victory. Princeps Archem Vald transmitted personally from the wounded god engine Invictus Malignum. His voice came through layered with machine thunder and amniotic distortion. Iron Thane Gravar, your chapter has saved the Crusade's heartline. The Legio records honor debt. Gravar stood in the ruins of the breached synaps chamber. Resin burned around him. His armor was cracked, scorched and painted in alien fluids. 3 brothers remained upright within sight. The rest were dead, buried, fighting elsewhere, or awaiting recovery. "Praise is inefficient," he said. "Transmit ammunition allotment." For several seconds, even the Titan Princeps said nothing. Then the reply came, heavy with something that might have been respect. "Compliance." The Bellwrath Crusade would grind on. The Lana rifts would burn for generations. More regiments would be spent. More worlds would be cracked. More banners would be raised over graveyards and called symbols of imperial endurance. The sons of Medusa had won the Crusade's greatest victory, or so the archives would one day claim in ink made from rendered corpses and sanctified oil. Heraxis Vale remained below them, hollowed, poisoned, split and silent. A graveyard of men, a graveyard of machines, a graveyard of worlds yet to die. Tylus was chosen because no sane empire had wanted it. The system held no garden world, no shrine moon, no glittering hive globe shouting tithes into the void. Its primary was a tired star that burned behind veils of metallic dust. Its planets were dead stones, cracked by ancient extraction and abandoned when the last profitable veins ran dry. The mining fleets had left behind hollowed asteroids, broken refinery cages, collapsed ore bridges, and machine spirits too degraded to remember the voices of their first masters. To the sons of Medusa, that made Tylus pure. Waste could be corrected. Emptiness could be armed. Dead rock did not complain when made useful. After Bellwrath, after the Lana rifts had drunk men, engines, and centuries, the chapter came to Tylus not as refugees, but as inheritors of a future already calculated. Their ships translated from the warp one day's sanctioned passage from the corpse world of Moiraan, close enough for the dead forge's silence to press against every auger screen like a cold hand. Dead Moiraan did not speak. Its ruined machine soul had been burned, shattered, and interdicted by Martian wrath. Yet the suns listened to the void around it with instruments too patient for doubt. If there was meaning in silence, the chamber ferrum intended to extract it. The first asteroid was split open by melter drills. The second was cored by mining lasers and made into a gene vault. The third received plasma reactors and became a forge temple, its inner walls plated in black iron and inscribed with the names of brothers who had died before the chapter had been granted a name. The fourth was armed before it was inhabited. Void shield pylons grew across its surface like the spines of a metal beast. Lance batteries were anchored into crust. Macro cannon shrines were blessed with oil, blood, and binary oath. By the time the wider Imperium recorded Tylus as occupied, The system had already become a fortress monastery scattered through an asteroid belt. The fortress did not resemble the mountain keeps of lesser chapters. It had no grand gate, no heroic statues meant to inspire mortal awe, no open courtyards where banners could stir in planetary wind. Tylus had no wind. It had pressure-sealed causeways, armor-glass observation trenches, airless docking mouths, auto-loading ammunition cathedrals, and reactor caverns where green light burned upon the faces of silent tech marines. Its halls were narrow, where weakness needed denial, and vast where engines needed space. Every corridor had a firing line. Every chapel could become a bunker. Every shrine stored ammunition behind its icons. In the hollowed core of Ferrum, Tertius lay the gene seed vaults, suspended in cold and guarded by brothers who had removed their eyelids to improve watchfulness. Each progenoid relic rested within triple-locked reliquaries, beneath stasis fields and machine prayer. No serf entered without sanction. No apothecary worked without the chamber Ferrum watching. The future of the chapter was not trusted to faith alone. Faith was useful. Redundancy was better. In Ferrum Secundus, dreadnought sarcophagi hung in vertical reliquary chains from the ceiling of a command vault. Some were empty, awaiting the ruin of heroes not yet broken enough to earn them. Others held the ancient dead, warriors whose bodies had failed, but whose hatred remained functional. Their sarcophagi were plugged into tactical cogitators, letting them dream through simulations of wars not yet fought. Their thoughts moved slowly at times, vast and cold from centuries inside iron. At other times, they woke with the clarity of murder. In Ferrum Primus, the Council of Three held court beneath a dome of blackened adamantine. Iron Thane Gravar of Atropos stood at the left of the triadic dais, his armor still bearing scarring from the Lana rifts. Iron Thane Cadron Vul of Megaera stood at the center, massive in plate, layered with repair seals and heavy weapon feed ports. Iron Thane Orman Routh of Lachesis stood at the right, thinner than the others, only by comparison, his limbs almost entirely augmetic, his helm crowned with a halo of auspex veins. Before them, the auto-prescient engines spoke. They were not oracles. The suns rejected the stink of witch prophecy and the decadent riddling of the Eldari. They did not cast bones, breathe narcotic smoke, consult warp shades, or trust the trembling meat of dreamers. Their auto-prescience was built from battlefield mathematics, Moiraan augury, casualty ledgers, astropathic delay patterns, tithe irregularities, forge output deviations, naval redeployment, ammunition demand, pilgrim migration, machine spirit anomalies, and the sacred fluctuations of the Emperor's distant light. Every datum entered the engines. Every pattern was tested until uselessness fell away. The result was not certainty. Certainty belonged to fools, saints, and corpses. The engines gave probability sharpened by devotion. They gave warnings. They gave corridors of future action in which weakness might bloom. The sons of Medusa did not call it prophecy when the machine predicted famine from shipping variants, rebellion from sermons and ammunition theft, or Xenos incursion from the sudden quieting of border astropaths. They called it readiness. A noospheric projection rotated above the dais, a storm of green runes around a map of imperial space. Threaded through it, dim and intermittent, burned the dead mark of Moira, not as worship, as origin, as wound, as unresolved calculation. "The Bellwrath expenditure is concluded," said Vul. His voice carried the grinder weight of a heavy tank crossing bone. "Crusade Command records victory." "Crusade Command records what it requires to justify attrition," said Routh. Gravar's optics clicked. Attrition was within projected tolerance. "By our measure," Routh said, "not by theirs. Their measure includes sentiment. Then it is flawed." No disagreement followed. The words had not been argument. They had been alignment. The doors to the council vault opened without him. Iron Hand's emissaries entered under escort. They came in black, their armor marked with the white hand of old Medusa, their movements hard with a familiarity that bordered on insult because it showed how much had once been shared. Their leader was Iron Captain Brantar Kor of Clan Raukan, though none of the sons spoke his clan name aloud. 2 Iron Fathers accompanied him. Behind them came Honor Guard veterans, whose hands rested near weapons without touching them. The sons did not offer welcome. The Iron Hands did not request it. Cold civility filled the vault like void frost. "Iron Thanes," Kor said. "Iron Captain," Vul replied. No one bowed, no one embraced, no one spoke of brotherhood. Hatred, among the sons of Ferrus Manus, did not require heat. Silence could express it with superior discipline. Kor's remaining organic eye moved across the triadic dais, then to the auto-prescient engines behind it. "Tylus is more developed than last report indicated." "Last report was obsolete before receipt," said Routh. "You fortify near dead Moirae." "We fortify where function demands. Function often wears old desire as armor." Gravar's gaze fixed on him. "State accusation, or conserve breath." Kor's jaw tightened, a minor flesh response poorly hidden by iron restraint. "No accusation is carried. The chapter of the Iron Hands acknowledges the continued loyalty of the sons of Medusa to the Imperium." "Your acknowledgement was not requested," said Vul. "It is given regardless." Logged. The exchange ended there, though a lesser breed of warrior might have mistaken the absence of raised voices for peace. The Iron Hands inspected the outer armories under supervision. They were shown enough to satisfy protocol, and not one cogitator bank more. They passed rows of land raiders stripped to their blessed skeletons, hulls being restored by servo rigs and chanting tech marines. They watched predators receive new sponsons. They saw dreadnought chassis under construction, each sarcophagus cradle waiting like an open tomb. They saw no weakness, and that irritated them more deeply than failure would have. When they departed, Kor paused at the embarkation spine. "Your chapter has changed." Vul regarded him through green lenses. "All iron changes under heat. Some iron becomes brittle, some becomes a blade." Kor looked toward the dead direction of Moirae, though no mortal eye could see it through the fortress walls and void between systems. "Be certain you know which you are." Vul did not answer. The Iron Hands vessel departed 2 hours later. The sons watched until it vanished into translation. The Mechanicus envoys arrived before the wake of its warp passage had faded. Their ship carried Martian authority in every line of its red hull, in every cog seal and broadcast identifier. Its arrival vector was precise. Its demands were not softened by courtesy. The envoys came bearing writs of inspection, doctrinal concern, and archival access, all sealed beneath the authority of distant forge synods that had never forgiven Moirae for requiring destruction. Magos Hestoff Ka was the first to enter the Chamber Ferrum's outer gate. He moved upon 6 mechanical limbs, his torso swathed in red and black, his true body hidden beneath layers of augmetic sanctity. His face was a bronze mask with 11 lenses. Data cables trailed behind him like entrails, carried by attendant servo skulls. He was accompanied by Lex mechanics, Skitari wardens, and 2 silent priests, whose cranial vaults glowed with sealed logic engines. Forge Right Malchior of the Chamber Ferrum received him beneath the adamantine decree of Solex. Weakness is death. Access is requested to relic data vaults, Moiraan archive remnants, and all auto-prescient engines, the Magos said in Binharic-laced Gothic. "Request is denied," Malchior replied. The Magos' lenses contracted. "The denial is premature. You have not reviewed authorization." "I reviewed it when your vessel entered the system. The writ is valid. The demand exceeds acceptable intrusion. The sons of Medusa remain under doctrinal observation. The sons of Medusa remain loyal servants of the Emperor. The 2 conditions are not mutually exclusive." nor is refusal and loyalty. Behind Malchior, Terminators of Atropos stood in a row, silent as sealed vaults. Their weapons were held in non-aggressive posture. Every one of those weapons was loaded. The Magos' Skitari escort shifted, their galvanic rifles angled downward by a degree that changed nothing and meant everything. "You would threaten emissaries of Mars?" Hestoff Carr asked. Malchior's steel face did not move. "No threat has been issued. Environmental hazard has been displayed. Your ritual politeness is inefficient. Your suspicion is old. Old suspicion is preserved because new evidence continues to feed it. Then starve." The Magos remained still for 11 seconds. Somewhere in the walls, targeting spirits woke and took measurements. At last, Hestoff Carr withdrew his data cables. "This denial will be recorded." "All events are recorded," said Malchior. The Mechanicus remained in system for 9 days, demanding lesser inspections, sampling reactor output, verifying gene seed purity, measuring forge deviations, and attempting to map the boundaries of refusal. The Chamber Ferrum answered each inquiry with obedience where necessary and obstruction where permitted. No blood was shed, no weapon fired, yet every exchange carried the shape of siege. After the envoys departed, the debate began within the Suns themselves. It took place inside the Hall of Cinders, where fragments of slag said to have come from dead Moirae were sealed behind armor glass. No brother knelt before them. Kneeling would have been indulgent. The fragments were not relics to comfort the weak. They were evidence. Ruin preserved for study. Iron Thanes, Forge Rites, Chaplains, Tech Marines, and Dreadnought Ancients gathered, while the asteroid's reactors hummed beneath them. "The creed has drifted," said Ancient Barracks from his sarcophagus cradle. His voice emerged slowly, grinding through age and machine grief. "When we departed the parent chapter, we carried the Moiraan thesis as calculation. Now some among us wear it as identity." Routh answered first. "Identity has utility. Utility validates retention. Utility can conceal corruption. So can nostalgia." The Dreadnought's optics burned deeper. "I do not speak from nostalgia. I speak from endurance. I have watched warriors remove healthy limbs to prove devotion. I have watched aspirants request pain before purpose. I have heard brothers say Moirae guides their hands. Not the Emperor, not duty, not logic. That is not calculation." Gravar stepped forward. "Names. Do not make this a purge before it is an answer." "Names permit answer." Barracks's sarcophagus pistons hissed. "Your logic becomes indistinguishable from fanaticism." The hall grew still. Vul's voice came from the center of the triad. "Fanaticism is error only when it fails." "And when it succeeds?" asked the Ancient. "Then lesser minds name it discipline after the victory." Barracks did not answer at once. He had once fought under commanders who remembered Cetol Solix as warrior rather than icon. His sarcophagus bore kill marks from wars whose names had been removed from modern archives. He had seen certainty save armies and doom them. "You are not immune to weakness because you hate it," the Dreadnought said. "Hatred can become appetite. Appetite is flesh." Gravar inclined his head a fraction. "Warning logged. Logged and dismissed. Logged and tested." That was the Sun's answer to all things. Test it. Survive it. Kill what failed. As the debate ended, Tylus continued to arm. In the Forge temples, voluntary limb removal became more common. Battle brothers came to the surgical altars, not because their flesh had been damaged, but because undamaged flesh offended them. Hands were surrendered for augmetic claws, eyes for lenses, spines for reinforced columns, lungs for pressure engines, hearts for pumps that did not quicken in fear or memory. Apothecaries monitored gene seed stability, while forge rites blessed sores and bone clamps. No screams were permitted unless they served diagnostic purpose. One warrior, Brother Salcor, watched his own left arm removed below the shoulder. The limb was healthy. strong, proven across a dozen wars. It was placed in a sterile tray, pale and bleeding, fingers twitching as nerves died. "Regret?" asked the attending tech marine. Salcor stared at the arm, as though looking at an enemy who had finally been named. "Reduction of failure surface," he said. "Acceptable." The sores resumed elsewhere. War preparation filled every asteroid. Dreadnought chassis were assembled beneath hanging icons of iron skulls. Land raiders from Bellwrath were restored plate by plate, their machine spirits coaxed from wrath into obedience. Forged ships expanded their internal manufactoria, growing ammunition lines and armor presses within their bellies. Serfs died in industrial accidents and were replaced by those more careful or less breakable. Failed aspirants became loading servitors. Damaged servitors became scrap. Scrap became armor. Armor became war. The chapter did not pray for future battles. It manufactured readiness until battle became inevitable. Deep in the auto-prescient vault, the engines continued to calculate. They consumed astropathic fragments from the Maelstrom region. They weighed tithe disputes, convoy delays, chapter redeployments, naval losses, coded trade imbalances, accusations of piracy, planetary fortification expenditures, and the increasingly irregular silence of a sector whose loyalty had begun to bend around ambition. Runes shifted in green light, probability lines tightened, names rose and fell. One returned again and again, surrounded by war projections dense enough to darken the hololith. Badab. Forge Right Malchior watched the result form. Iron Thane Routh stood beside him, reading the future not as a mystic would, but as an executioner studies a condemned man's neck. "Time horizon?" Routh asked. "Decades," Malchior said. "Possibly longer. Variables remain unstable." "Rebellion?" "Probability escalating." "Actors?" The engine hissed. Data bled across the projection. Secession, Astral Claws, Tithe Defiance, Maelstrom, Fortress Worlds, Loyalist Intervention, Void War, a Ring of Steel, a city-sized orbital bastion hanging above a doomed world like a skull. Routh watched the image of Sentinel Sigma rotate in ghost light, unborn war waiting inside the machine's cold imagination. "Archive it," he said. "For council review? For war." The dead silence of Moiraan pressed against the edge of the system. Tylus listened, and in the dark between iron asteroids, the sons of Medusa began preparing for a rebellion the Imperium had not yet learned to fear. 30 years before the Badab system became a wound that loyalists would carve open with their own hands, Valand Kal learned the measure of Karab Cullen beneath a sky made green by orc fire. The world was named Garrick Secundus in the administratum rolls, though its people had ceased using the name once the first scrap meteors fell. Names mattered to clerks, saints, and dying nobles. To the orcs, the world was simply a place to land, burn, loot, and drown in noise. To the Astra Militarum regiments dying across its continents, it was mud, smoke, and a horizon that kept vomiting greenskins. To the sons of Medusa, it was a battlefield whose infection had passed the threshold of reclamation. The War Skullcleava had come like a moving continent. It spread not as an army alone, but as a biological catastrophe wrapped in iron. Spores fell in their billions, settling in craters, pipeways, corpse fields, and drinking reservoirs. Feral greenskins clawed out of fungal muck within weeks, already fighting, already laughing, already searching for sharper metal and louder death. Above them came the true horde. Scraplanders crashed into cities and unfolded into fortresses. Gargants walked from dust clouds with furnace bellies roaring, their arms ending in cannons large enough to shell hive spires into avalanche. Speed freaks turned the old arterial highways into grinding rivers of red paint, black smoke, burning wheels, and bodies dragged beneath spiked tracks. Mobs swarmed in numbers that made Auspec's returns blur into one vast green mass. They laughed as they died. That was what the mortal officers hated most. Men could understand rage. They could understand discipline, hunger, fear, hatred, zealotry, even madness. They could not understand an enemy that took joy in being dismembered if the blast was loud enough. Orcs charged through artillery barrages with limbs missing, firing wildly, bellowing at one another, kicking aside their own dead to reach the next fight. They died laughing with bolt holes through their skulls. They died punching tank hulls with broken hands. They died trying to bite through ceramite. The sons of Medusa gave them no answer but extinction. Cal watched the horde from the command ramp of the Land Raider Iron Excision. His armor was sealed against the world's poisoned air, its emerald and white plates streaked with ash. His augmetic left hand rested on the haft of his omniscient axe. Around him, the armored spearhead of Atropos waited in perfect formation. Predators growled on either flank, their turrets tracking distant heat blooms. Vindicators idled with siege shields lowered, demolisher cannons loaded. Land Raiders formed the iron center, engines snarling, assault ramps shut like clenched jaws. Dreadnoughts stood between them, ancient and silent beneath the falling soot. Behind the ridge, Devastator squads had already made kill boxes of the approaches. Every heavy bolter, missile launcher, plasma cannon, and lascannon aimed into measured lanes of annihilation. To Cal's right stood Carib Cullen of the Red Scorpions. Cullen's presence was different from Cal's. The Red Scorpion commander carried himself with formal severity, his armor immaculate despite the ash storm, his heraldry displayed with exactness, his command staff arrayed according to codex discipline. His warriors stood in clean ranks. Their apothecaries moved with reverence. Their sergeants spoke in approved battle cant. Everything about them declared order, purity, doctrine, and command. They respected the sons of Medusa. They did not trust them. Cal found this acceptable. Trust was a flesh-born preference. Respect based on observed function had greater value. Cullen studied the hololithic projection flickering between them. The orc scrap megafort dominated the plain ahead, a mountain of wrecked hab blocks, stolen manufacture and plating, void ship ribs, rusted cranes, tank carcasses, and idol faces hammered together into a blasphemous monument to noise. Smoke belched from its towers. Gun platforms crawled along its walls on tracks. Rocket batteries fired at random into the sky, occasionally striking Imperial aircraft and more often striking other orcs, which appeared to entertain them. Gargants stood near the central gate like crude gods. "The Codex would advise encirclement," said Cullen. His voice was controlled, rich with command, the voice of a warrior accustomed to being obeyed by men who had never once doubted the structure of obedience. "The Codex would be correct under conditions of disciplined opposition," Cal replied. "These are orcs. Therefore, the Codex must be interpreted through enemy deficiency." Cullen's helm turned slightly. "And your interpretation?" Cal looked toward the minefields ahead. The orcs had not hidden them well. Many were visible as mounds of scrap, skulls, unstable promethium drums, pressure charges, and unexploded shells hammered into the earth. The field was thick enough to slow mortal armor. Slowing was the point. Orcs understood momentum by instinct, if not doctrine. "We drive through the center," Cal said. "The losses will be considerable. Enemy losses will be greater. That is not always sufficient justification. It is when time is the threatened resource." Cullen was silent for a moment. Beyond them, another orc rocket screamed overhead, corkscrewing through the smoke before detonating against the void shields of a distant warlord Titan. The Titan did not turn. Its volcano cannon spoke a heartbeat later, and a section of the orc outer wall became molten rain. Cullen looked back to the projection. "My red scorpions will hold the flanks and prevent breakout. Efficient. You will not deviate into unnecessary destruction." Cal's lenses clicked once. "Define unnecessary." Cullen did not answer immediately. The functional relationship between them was forged in that silence. It held no warmth. It carried no brotherhood beyond the bloodless fact that both were Adeptus Astartes and both had enemies to kill. Cullen saw in Cal a weapon too cold to admire and too useful to discard. Cal saw in Cullen an officer whose adherence to form did not prevent effectiveness. It was not affection. It was enough. The advance began when the Titans fired. The first salvo struck the scrap megafort like judgment from a collapsing sun. Walls buckled inward, gun towers burst apart, orc bodies flew in pieces, limbs pinwheeling through smoke, heads trailing oily hair and teeth. The horde answered with noise. Sirens screamed. War horns bellowed. Engines revved. Millions of throats took up the same brutal roar until the ground itself seemed to shake with crude joy. The sons of Medusa drove forward. Minefields vanished beneath their tracks. The first detonations lifted curtains of soil and scrap around the land raiders, but the vehicles kept moving, hulls scarred, machine spirits snarling in offended wrath. A predator lost its left track and slewed sideways, still firing as orc buggies descended on it in a swarm. Its sponson heavy bolters shredded the first wave into meat and burning wheels. A buggy ramped over the wreckage and struck the predator's turret, exploding so close that the orc driver's skull bounced across the glacis plate and stuck there in fire-blackened grease. Cal did not slow. Rocket fire came in sheets. Some spiraled away. Some struck home. A Vindicator erupted to his left, ammunition cooking off in a chain of internal blasts that blew the siege tank open from within. Its crew died in pieces, their bodies turned to vapor, bone chips, and cooked blood across the iron hulls behind them. The suns marked the loss and closed the gap. Speed freak formation converging from Western Highway, voxed Brother Naya. Devastator Grid 3, Cal answered. On a ridge of broken stone, the Devastators of Atropos opened fire. The highway became a slaughter trench. Heavy bolters hammered the oncoming bikes and war trucks, stitching explosive shells through drivers, engines, and fuel tanks. Plasma cannons bloomed among them, turning mobs into white fire and tire rims. Missile launchers struck the center of the convoy and flipped vehicles end over end, crushing orcs beneath burning wreckage. Still they came, laughing, waving blades, firing pistols into the air. One orc war boss, in a massive truck, bellowed across an open channel, somehow punching through Imperial Vox discipline with crude power. "Come on, Den, shiny gits. Skull Cleava wants your heads for his gate." Cal listened to the transmission for 1 second. "Locate source." "Acquired," said Naya. "Remove." A Lascanon beam from the ridge cut through the truck's engine block. The vehicle became a tumbling fireball. The war boss flew from the wreck and landed in the road, still alive, dragging himself forward with both arms and laughing through a mouth full of broken tusks. A second beam erased him from the waist up. The Suns reached the megafort wall without formation collapse. That alone broke the first layer of orc expectation. The Greenskins had prepared for a charge that would become confused in the mines and drown under rocket fire. They had not prepared for an armored spearhead that accepted damage as arithmetic and continued directly into their teeth. The Vindicators fired at close range. Demolisher shells struck the gate and turned it inward, crushing hundreds of orcs gathered behind it. Land raiders followed, tracks grinding over the flattened mass, assault ramps dropping before the dust had cleared. Terminators entered the fort. Cal led them into the breach, with his axe alive in his hand. The interior was a world of smoke, scrap, furnace pits, and crude banners made from flayed hides. Orcs surged from every gantry and doorway. Slugger rounds clanged from Terminator plate. Choppers sparked against ceramite. Power claws whined. The Suns answered with storm bolters and chain fists. Orcs burst apart under bolt impacts, their thick bodies requiring more punishment than men, and receiving it without complaint. A knob swung a chain axe into Brother Routh's shoulder, biting deep enough to score the armor. Routh seized the knob's head with a power fist and closed his fingers until the skull came apart in a wet green explosion. Resistance enthusiastic, voxed Nea. Enthusiasm is not durability, Cal replied. Deeper inside the fort, dreadnought Ancient Malchior met the Orc Walkers. They came stomping through smoke, crude killer cans, and larger engines built from looted tanks and insane confidence. Their saw arms spun. Their guns fired until barrels glowed. One walker bore a painted grin across its front plate, and a crew of grots screaming from a cage welded to its back. Malchior walked into them like a relic of a colder god. His assault cannon shredded the first machine's knee assembly, dropping it face first into the mud before his power claw tore out its engine. He crushed the second against a support pillar. The third slammed. A buzz soared into his sarcophagus front, cutting a shower of sparks across the nameplates of the ancient dead. Malchior's vox growled like an avalanche under iron. Insufficient. He ripped the saw arm free and drove it through the walker's cockpit. The orc pilot inside burst against the inner glass, its laughter becoming a wet gurgle as the stolen blade pinned it through the chest. Before the chamber was secure, Tech Marines were already among the wreckage. They moved with servo arms extended, cutting away useful pistons, engine cores, ammunition feeds, cogitator scraps, and armor plate worth purification. Orcs still twitched nearby. One tried to bite a Tech Marine's ankle through a severed jaw. The Tech Marine looked down, stamped once, and continued harvesting components. Cullen saw the after-action picked feed from the flank command post. Your Tech Marines strip enemy wreckage before victory is confirmed, he voxed to Cal. Battlefield resource denial and reclamation are simultaneous functions. It borders on doctrinal impropriety. It improves supply resilience. There was a pause. Continue, Cullen said. The megafort fell by degrees. Not cleanly. Orcs did not allow clean war. They counterattacked from latrines, engine ducts, ammunition pits, and burning piles of their own dead. They detonated mines under their own feet to kill a single space marine. They fired captured artillery inside the fort walls because the blast might hit something worth laughing at. They flooded tunnels with squigs, grots, and burning fuel. The suns advanced through it all, not fast, not glorious, but inevitable. Then the city called. Varnak Hive lay 12 kilometers east of the battle line, its evacuation columns still crawling toward Imperial transit yards. The city had been ordered emptied 3 days earlier. It had not obeyed quickly enough. No hive ever did. Too many souls, too many sealed districts, too many priests refusing to abandon relic chapels, too many nobles bribing their way into priority lifts, too many manufacturum guilds protecting machinery while the horizon turned green. Speed freaks broke through the southern cordon first. Orc bikes screamed down the refugee routes, their wheels throwing up sheets of blood as they ploughed through civilians, pack animals, servitors, and overloaded carts. War trucks followed, firing into the crowds, dragging chains through masses of fleeing bodies. Behind them came mobs, then looted tanks, then the first gargant shadow at the edge of the smoke. The Hive commander begged for reinforcement. Cullen ordered Red Scorpion reserves to stabilize the breach. Cal reviewed the tactical projection and overrode the request on the shared command channel. Negative. Stabilization insufficient. Evacuation failed. Cullen's voice hardened. There are still Imperial citizens inside the Hive. Correct. They can be saved. Incorrect. The Red Scorpions are moving. If they enter Varnak Hive, they will be fixed in urban attrition, and the Orc spearhead will gain hostages, biomass, slaves, machinery, and momentum. Those civilians are not biomass. Cal watched the rune clusters spreading through the city. Green, red, amber, panic rendered as light, lives rendered as failed movement. They are resources under enemy acquisition. Cullen's anger came through the vox as colder discipline, not raised volume. Iron Thane, choose your next words with care. Cal did not hesitate. Orbital and artillery denial strike. Full grid saturation. Varnak Hive is forfeit. The silence after that was brief and murderous. Then the Orc Gargant breached the outer district wall, and the picked feed showed thousands of civilians vanishing beneath its feet. Cullen spoke at last. "You will answer for this." "After the war," Cal said. He gave the order. The sky opened over Varnak Hive. Imperial artillery, naval lance fire, and macro shells descended together. The first strikes removed the southern districts and the Orc spearhead within them. The second wave walked through the refugee avenues, turning roads into red glass and ash. The third struck the Manufactorum heart. Reactors burst. Hab towers folded into themselves, each floor crushing the one beneath it, each chamber full of people who had been too slow to live. Orcs died in heaps, laughing until the pressure wave pulped their lungs. Civilians died without understanding who had killed them. The Gargant staggered beneath a lance strike, its head and command deck sheared away in a fountain of fire, scrap, and green flesh. It fell across 3 districts and disappeared in the rising storm. Varnak Hive became a pyre visible from orbit. The Orc advance in the east died with it. The battle for the scrap megafort ended before dawn. Skullcleaver's personal guard fought in the central engine pit, surrounded by burning icons and mounds of their dead. The war boss himself was enormous, iron-jawed, tusked, his armor painted with crude trophies taken from Imperial tanks and Space Marine plate. He met Cal amid the smoke and swung a power claw large enough to tear a dreadnought open. The first blow smashed Cal through a heap of scrap. Warning runes filled his sight. His remaining organic organs lurched. Auto-sanguinary systems flooded him with chemical correction. He rose before the Orc finished laughing. "Good!" Skullcleaver roared. "This one's got iron in him." Cal drove his axe into the war boss's knee. The field bit through armor, tendon, and bone. Skullcleaver dropped, still swinging. Cal stepped inside the arc, took the impact across his shoulder, felt armor split and pistons scream, and buried his augmetic fist in the Orc's throat. The war boss tried to bite him. Cal twisted, tore, and opened the creature from jaw to sternum with the axe's return stroke. Skullcleaver died trying to laugh. Cal removed the head and threw it into the engine pit. By sunrise, the war was broken on Garrick Secundus, not ended. Orcs were never ended, while spores lived in soil, and scrap remained to weld into guns. But the spine of the horde had been severed. The megafort burned. The Gargants were dead or dying. The speed freaks had been reduced to wreckage and meat across the highways. Imperial forces began the long work of extermination, sterilization, and corpse accounting. The Red Scorpions recorded the campaign with formal precision. They noted the sons of Medusa's armored spearhead as tactically decisive. They noted their destruction of enemy fortifications as exemplary. They noted their integration with heavy weapons kill boxes as efficient. They also noted the bombardment of Varnak Hive, the premature reclamation of battlefield wreckage, the refusal to divert strength towards civilian preservation, and the machine cult severity that rendered their allied conduct appallingly cold. Cal did not read the judgment. Cullen did. He stood in the strategium of his command vessel, the reports spread before him in clean columns, his helm resting beside the hololithic display of a world saved by methods no priest would praise aloud. Beyond the armor glass, the sons of Medusa fleet burned in orbit like iron knives waiting to be sheathed. A Red Scorpion captain stood nearby. "My lord, shall we recommend censure?" Cullen's expression did not change. "No. The Varnak action alone was monstrous," Cullen said. "Yes, my lord. And effective." The captain was silent. Cullen looked at the casualty projections, the Orc momentum estimates, the hive loss ratios. The predicted war extension had Varnak fallen intact. He disliked what he saw. He disliked more that the numbers defended Cal. "Record them accurately," Cullen said. "No embellishment, no omission." "As you command." Cullen watched the green and white ships of the sons of Medusa hold position over the graveyard world. He did not like Valen Cal. He did not trust him. He did not wish to fight beside him longer than necessity demanded. But there would come wars in which hesitation killed more surely than cruelty. There would come fortresses that needed monsters sent into their throats. There would come rebellions where the Imperium required warriors who could look upon the screaming cost of victory and pay it without trembling. 30 years later, when Badab began to burn, Carib Cullen remembered exactly where to deploy monsters who did not hesitate. The Badab War began as many imperial catastrophes began, not with a scream, but with a declaration. The parchment bore seals. The seals bore authority. The authority bore death. Across the Maelstrom Zone, astropathic choirs tore their throats raw, carrying the judgment from fortress to fortress, fleet to fleet, shrine to shrine, and warship to warship. The astral claws, and those who stood beside them, had crossed from grievance into secession, from secession into rebellion, from rebellion into heresy by the only measure that mattered. Terror had judged. The Imperium had chosen its word. Once the word heretic was spoken with sufficient power behind it, all lesser truths became ash. The sons of Medusa had predicted the shape of it long before the first official condemnations reached Tylus. That did not make the war less useful. Their fleet translated at the edge of the Badab theatre in disciplined silence. Atropos came at full strength, every company mustered, every armory opened, every dreadnought woken from iron sleep. Lachesis sent hunter cadres, pursuit elements, armored support, and augur command formations. Megara contributed siege brothers, devastator cohorts, tech marines and war engines whose machine spirits had tasted the Lana rifts and hungered for a cleaner enemy. Strike cruisers moved in emerald and white formation around forged ships, escorts, and the vast shape of a battle barge whose armor carried scars from wars forgotten by mortal archives. They came without apology. They came without song. They came because rebellion was weakness declared aloud, and weakness required correction. Iron Thane Valand Cal stood before the Loyalist War Council aboard the command vessel of Carib Cullen. The chamber was crowded with authority. Red Scorpion's officers stood like statues of doctrine. Naval lords in void black uniforms whispered through augmetic throat grills. Administratum functionaries clutched data slates as though parchment and fear could shield them from transhuman judgment. Representatives of other loyalist chapters watched Cal with open caution, or with the colder discipline of men who understood that distaste was not strategy. Cullen stood at the head of the hololithic table. The projection of the Badab sector rotated between them, a storm of red marks, contested routes, fortified worlds, and broken oaths. Signacs burned in miniature. Decabalus flashed beneath siege indicators. Eshuna glowed with fleet interdiction lines. Galen 6 pulsed deeper in the display, its fortress hives and orbital guns rendered in warning amber. Cullen's voice carried the same formal severity Cal remembered from the war against Skull Cliava. The Loyalist command structure requires unified operational compliance. Cal's lenses fixed on him. Strategic deployment accepted. That is not the same as compliance. Correct. A faint shift moved among the mortal officers. One of them breathed too loudly. Cullen did not look away. You will operate under Loyalist high command. At theatre level. At all levels necessary for cohesion. The sons of Medusa do not surrender tactical obedience to external authority. A naval lord made the error of speaking. Iron Thane, this is a coalition war. Cal turned his helm a fraction. Coalitions are inefficient structures tolerated when unilateral victory is unavailable. The man closed his mouth. Cullen's expression remained unreadable. You will not undermine the campaign. We will strengthen it by refusing delay. You will report objectives achieved, or objectives rendered irrelevant. Your independence will be watched. Cal inclined his head. All things should be watched. No more was required. Cullen knew the weapon before him. He had seen Varnak Hive die under Cal's calculation. He had condemned the coldness and used the result. Badab would demand many such uses before it was done. The first campaigns did not look like history while they were being fought. They looked like fire seen through smoke. On Synaps, the sons of Medusa cleansed post-atomic wastelands where secessionist armor columns hid beneath radiation storms and broken hive shells. The land there had been glassed by old bombardments, then inhabited again by men too desperate or too obedient to question why their children were born with black eyes and soft bones. Rebel artillery nested in the ruins. The suns advanced through rad winds behind land raiders and dreadnoughts, their armor ticking under the poison rain, their auspex returns distorted by ghosts of buried cities. They found the enemy by measuring where the wasteland tried too hard to be empty. Then they killed everything that answered. On Decabalus, they broke rebel void docks by boarding them from 3 vectors at once. The docks were ribbed things suspended above a polluted moon, crawling with shipwrights, renegade armsmen, and gun crews sworn to the astral claws. The suns entered through maintenance spines and reactor chimneys, cutting power, venting compartments, and executing dockmasters before the defenders knew which alarms were true. Men died in vacuum with blood boiling in their eyes. Whole gun decks were depressurized while their crews hammered uselessly against sealed hatches. The suns recovered ammunition, sanctified machine spirits worth saving, and destroyed the rest. On Ashuna, the outer bastions refused surrender behind shields of oath and ferrocrete. Megara siege brothers answered with method. They severed water, then power, then vox, then hope. When the gates opened after 17 days, the defenders came out thin, desperate, and carrying white cloths over their heads. Cal ordered the officers separated, the engineers interrogated, the gunners shot, and the rest branded for labor assessment. Resistance, once broken, became raw material. By then, the name Sons of Medusa had become a muttered thing among the loyalist armies. Not hated, not precisely. Feared by allies in the way men feared an artillery barrage called down too close to their own line. Useful, devastating, impersonal, capable of saving a front by erasing everything near it. Galen 6 taught the sector what that meant. The world was a polluted jewel of industry and defiance, a planet girdled by orbital guns and veiled beneath manufacturum smog. Its oceans were dark chemical basins, slick with promethium runoff and corpse ash. Its continents were welded together by rail arteries, hive spines, plasma foundries, military depots, and void-shielded command citadels. Fortress hives rose like rotten teeth from the haze, each surrounded by killing fields, defense walls, gun towers, and devotional statues rededicated to the cause of secessionist pride. The population believed the astral claws would protect them. They had been told that the Imperium was distant, wasteful, and cruel. They had been told that Badab's defiance was duty. They had been told that the loyalists would break against the outer guns and starve before the fortress hives. Mazos Douli arrived to prove them wrong. Douli was of Atropos, and where Cal was a blade descending, Douli was a machine closing around a throat. He commanded the Galen subjugation from the strike cruiser Mortis Calculum, his body half hidden within a command harness of cables, augmetic feeds, and noospheric relays. His skull was shaved to the metal beneath the skin. His jaw had been replaced by a vox plate. One eye was organic, pale and steady. The other was a green lens that never blinked. Below him, Galen 6 filled the oculus, alive with orbital fire. "Population loyalty estimate?" asked Brother Varrox. "Compromised beyond civilian distinction," Doul said. "Collaborator pockets remain. Assess utility. Limited. Then preserve only what accelerates compliance." Varrox bowed his helm. "By your command." The assault began with darkness. Lachesis strike teams infiltrated the orbital communication relays and murdered the signal priests at their consoles. Megara devastators deployed to capture debris platforms and silence defense satellites with Lascanon fire. Atropos boarding claws tore into the outer gun rings and left no survivors capable of touching a trigger. When the planetary Voxnet screamed for astral claw intervention, it found only static, false confirmations, and looped prayers. Then the power grids died. Not everywhere. Dooley had no interest in symbolic blackout. He killed power where panic would be most efficient. Hive transit arteries froze in the deep levels, trapping millions in sealed mag-rail tunnels without air circulation. Shielded noble districts went dark, while lower manufactoria remained lit, ensuring that class hatred would ignite inside the cities before imperial boots touched the ground. Water purification shrines failed in rebel barracks, while loyalist collaborator zones kept pressure. The dead began piling in stairwells before the first drop pod fell. The suns came down in green fire. Automata weapons landed with them. Not true relics of forbidden autonomy, not abominable intelligence, but sanctioned kill engines slaved to command protocols and tech marine will. Iron crawlers bristling with Volkite arrays stalked through the ash. Gun servitors rolled on track units, their lobotomized brains locked to target recognition. Servo skull clusters mapped heat signatures through hab walls. Combat automata moved with brutal restraint, firing only when ordered and killing exactly what had been designated. Dooley trusted them more than mortal allies. Machines did not plead. Machines did not panic. Machines did not reinterpret orders to protect the trembling needs of flesh. The first fortress hive to fall was Carthag's spire. Its defenders expected negotiation after the outer curtain wall cracked. They had hostages. They had void shield reserves. They had planetary militia in the millions and manufactorum levies carrying autoguns fresh from the production lines. They had rebel noble bloodlines commanding from bunkers plated in gold and plasteel. They believed the Suns would seek surrender to preserve infrastructure. Atropos entered through the sewage reclamation vaults and the corpse processing chimneys. The killing moved upward. Bolt fire turned hab militia into broken heaps across their own barricades. Flamers washed through levy dormitories where men slept beside their rifles. Dreadnoughts smashed lift gates aside and climbed through maintenance shafts too narrow for tanks, dragging defenders out of side tunnels and crushing them against the walls. Devastator formations established firing lanes across transit junctions and reduced every counterattack to drifting red fog. The automata walked ahead into choke points, absorbing last fire, identifying command voices, and marking them for execution. Dooley reached the noble command bunker 6 hours after breach. The rebel patriarchs had gathered there with their heirs, strategists, oath scribes, and pict recorders. They wore uniforms heavy with medals given by secessionist command. Some held pistols, some held data tablets, some held family icons and useless pride. Their eldest tried to speak first. "You have no lawful claim to this world," Dooley gestured. A gun servitor shot the man through both knees. He fell screaming. "Bloodline registry," Dooley said. A tech marine stepped forward, projecting genealogical data in green light. Faces were matched. Names were confirmed. Succession branches identified. The rebel nobles understood too slowly. "Execute command continuity," Dool ordered. The Suns did not kill them all at once. That would have risked missing functionaries disguised as lesser kin. They killed by rank, then by inheritance claim, then by strategic education, then by advisory role. Bolt pistols cracked in the enclosed bunker until the walls streamed with blood and the floor became unsafe underfoot. A young officer tried to crawl beneath the hololith table and was dragged out by a servo arm. His skull burst against the floor before his hands found purchase. A collaborator envoy watched from the far wall, shaking so violently that his teeth clicked. Dooley looked at him once. "You know the transit codes for the Eastern Artery?" "Yes, Lord." "Then you remain useful." The man swallowed, his eyes fixed on the butchered noble line. "And after?" "After is earned," the eastern artery opened within the hour. Sun's armor entered the hive heart through rail tunnels filled with dead commuters. Their boots broke bodies that had suffocated standing upright in the crush. Children, laborers, militia reservists, priests, bureaucrats, dock workers, and rebel informants were indistinguishable under the press of death. The suns moved through them as through rubble. The smell was immense. Human waste, burst lungs, old fear, hot metal, decay rising in sealed dark. Atmospheric toxicity high, voxed Varrox. Flesh made the air, Dul answered. Armor makes it irrelevant. The second hive learned from the first and sealed every lower approach. Dooley collapsed the hive transit arteries instead. Macro charges placed by Lachesis teams broke the spinal tunnels under the Western District. Entire levels dropped. Hab blocks folded inward. Refugee columns vanished into sinkholes filled with rail debris, promethium fires, and falling rockcrete. Rebel armor trapped above the collapse tried to redeploy and found every bridge targeted by Megara fire. By dusk, the hive had become 3 isolated fortresses instead of 1 coordinated defense. By midnight, the suns had killed the commanders of all 3. Allied commanders began to question the campaign on the 4th day. A Red Scorpion's liaison transmitted a formal concern regarding population preservation, infrastructure damage, and the distinction between liberation and annihilation. Dooley answered with the compliance projections. Resistance nodes reduced by more than half. Orbital guns neutralized. Secessionist command bloodlines severed. Loyalist collaborators sorted by utility. Manufactorum output damaged but recoverable under servitor labor. Civilian casualties irrelevant to primary objective, except where their bodies obstructed movement. The liaison asked whether the Suns considered Galen 6 saved. Dooley replied, Galen 6 is being corrected. On the surface, the correction continued. Power grids were not restored to districts that resisted. Water was rerouted away from suspect populations. Food vaults were opened only for labor groups tagged compliant. Rebel Medicae were executed unless they possessed technical knowledge. Priests who had blessed secessionist banners were hanged from Vox towers with their tongues nailed to their robes. Militia who surrendered in useful formations were processed. Militia who surrendered after ammunition depletion were shot. The Suns left alive those who could repair, carry, guide, translate, inform, or produce. Everyone else entered the arithmetic of conquest as burden, threat, or corpse. The cruelty became legend before the battle ended. Secessionist broadcasts called the Suns machine devils, dead men in green and white, iron butchers without souls. Loyalist soldiers, drunk on terror and rationed spirits behind the lines, began telling similar stories in lower voices. They said Atropos brothers counted bodies by weight because individual lives were too small a unit. They said Mazos Dooley had ordered an entire Hab district sealed so the cries of the starving would draw out rebels trying to rescue kin. They said the Suns made servitors from captured officers while the men were still reciting their oaths. Some of it was false. Enough was true that the lies did not matter. By the 7th day, Galen 6 broke. Its last orbital gun ceased firing after a dreadnought assault through the reactor crypts. Its final secessionist commander detonated his own bunker rather than be taken and was recorded as wasteful. Its manufactoria were brought under guard. Its hives burned, bled, and reopened under loyalist control, though no citizen who saw the green and white armor in the avenues believed liberation had come in any form the human soul could welcome. Dool stood in the primary command spire as the world's compliance signal transmitted. Around him, the chamber was filled with dead officers, broken cogitators, and servitors dragging bodies into sorted piles. Useful uniforms were removed, augmetics were tagged, weapons were cleared, identity seals were collected for archival correction. Varrox approached through the blood and gave the sign of iron acknowledgement. Galen 6 is compliant. Temporarily, Dool said. Resistance remnants remain below statistical concern. Nothing living is below concern, only below priority. The Vox shrine behind them crackled. At first, the signal was distortion, mangled by distance and war traffic. Then the runes resolved. Fleet priority, chapter cipher, loss marker. All active Sun's channels received it within the same breath. Varrox read first and went still. Dule turned slowly toward the shrine. The message repeated in cold, perfect form. The strike cruiser Warspite had been destroyed near the grief system. All hands lost. For a moment, the command spire seemed to become very quiet, though the servitors still dragged the dead, the fires still burned below, and Galen 6 still groaned beneath the weight of its own salvation. Dule processed the information. Ship, crew, serfs, tech marines, battle brothers, gene seed at risk, machine spirits extinguished, honor debt created, enemy agency undetermined. No grief crossed his face. Grief was flesh claiming ownership over loss. Dule opened a channel to Valen Kal. Warspite is dead, he said. Across the void, through the static of a war growing darker, Kal's reply came like iron dragged across stone. Then record the debt. Warspite was dead, and the sons of Medusa did not grieve. Grief was flesh, insisting that loss belonged to the living. Grief was heat, breath, tremor, memory and weakness dressed in mourning robes. It made men speak too loudly. It made officers waste hours with eulogies. It made priests spill incense over names already entered into ledgers of the dead. The sons of Medusa permitted none of it. Warspite had been a strike cruiser of the chapter. Therefore, Warspite had been weapon, shrine, armory, reliquary, conveyance, forge extension, and living machine spirit, bound in service to the Emperor. Its destruction was not sadness. It was injury to function. It was theft of materiel. It was the extinction of trained crew, the loss of sacred systems, the burning of armor stores, the silencing of engines, and the possible denial of gene seed recovery. It was a debt. Debts were not mourned. Debts were corrected. The first report reached Valen Kal through 3 damaged relays, 2 astropathic confirmations, and the cold voice of Mazos Dule transmitting from Galen 6. The strike cruiser had died near the grief system. The executioners had played their part. Warspite had been taken from the chapter with all hands. No rescue signal endured. No recovery beacon answered. The void had swallowed the hull and every brother within it, and the enemy had continued to breathe afterward. Kal stood inside the strategium of the battle barge Ferrum Invicta, while the report repeated across the hololithic table. The chamber's light was green and corpse pale, glowing over the Iron Thane's armor. Around him stood Atropos officers, tech marines of the chamber Ferrum, serfs with data chains welded into their wrists, and a single dreadnought sarcophagus wired into the command dais. No one spoke until the data cycle ended. Lieutenant Oros Nair broke the silence. Warspite loss confirmed. Logged, Kal said. Executioner's involvement confirmed. Logged. Salamander's interference in pursuit and withdrawal corridor remains disputed. Kal turned his helm slightly. The motion was small. Men who did not know him would have missed the murder in it. Clarify disputed. Nair's augmetic eyes flickered as he processed the layered reports. Loyalist forces moved to engage. The executioners withdrew under conditions created by Salamander's intervention. Intent is contested. Outcome is not. A tech marine hissed static through his vox grill. The sons of Vulcan shielded the debtors from immediate correction. The dreadnought sarcophagus stirred. Venerable ancient Khalid's voice emerged from its speakers, vast and slow, like a tomb opening beneath iron mountains. Then the debt expands. No warrior shouted agreement. No fist struck a breastplate. No oath of vengeance filled the chamber. Their fury had no need of theatre. It passed from helm to helm as target prioritization, ship movement projection, political consequence threshold, acceptable collateral matrix, and future engagement probability. Executioner's heraldry appeared above the table, then salamanders, then the possible routes of withdrawal, then the diplomatic fracture lines among loyalist forces if the Suns acted before sanction, then the cost of waiting. Cal watched every probability thread tighten. To strike the executioners now risks loyalist cohesion, Naya said. To leave the debt unmarked risks chapter cohesion, said the tech marine. Incorrect, Cal replied. The debt is marked. Its collection is delayed. Khalid's sarcophagus rotated on its cradle, cables creaking. Delay is corrosion. Delay is sometimes the weapon that permits a cleaner cut. The ancients' optics burned hotter. You speak like Lachesis. I speak as required. The strategium doors opened before Khalid could answer. A red scorpion's emissary entered under armed escort, his armor immaculate despite the war's filth, his bearing rigid with the cold confidence of a chapter that believed purity was proven by structure. He carried the authority of Carib Cullen, and therefore was not shot before delivering his words. Iron Thane Cal, he said. Loyalist High Command directs the sons of Medusa towards Sentinel Sigma. A rune expanded over the hololith. The orbital fortress emerged in ghostlight. Sentinel Sigma anchored the ring of steel above Badab Primaris. It was not a station so much as a city of armor and guns, dragged into orbit and taught to hate. Macro cannon batteries studded its flanks. Void shields wrapped it in layered denial. Docking ribs held gun platforms, torpedo shrines, defense monitors, and mine control nodes. Beneath it, Badab Primaris turned like a world waiting for sentence. Cal studied the projection. Cullen directs us away from the executioners. Cullen directs you toward the artery of the war. A political answer. A strategic one. They are not mutually exclusive. The Red Scorpion's jaw tightened. Sentinel Sigma must fall if the surface assault is to begin. Your forces are best suited to breaking the fortress from within. Cal considered the emissary, then the fortress, then the silent executioner's rune still glowing at the edge of the display. Warspite remains unpaid. Badab Primaris remains unconquered. The truth of it had weight. The Suns could kill their debtors later, or they could jeopardize the war now. Valen Cal did not forgive. He postponed. Accepted, he said. The emissary inclined his head. The Red Scorpions record your compliance. Record accuracy. We comply with the objective, not the motive. The assault began in the dead hours before the Loyalist fleet hurled itself against the ring of steel. Void war unfolded in terrible silence beyond the hulls. Lances crossed the black in white wounds. Torpedoes bloomed into brief suns. Strike craft formations broke apart under flak bursts and macro shells. Boarding torpedoes ran like iron needles toward the fortress and died in their hundreds. Some were vaporized before impact. Some struck void shields and smeared themselves into glittering dust. Some reached the outer hull, only to be torn open by defensive fire, spilling Astartes, armsmen and servitors into vacuum. The sons of Medusa did not waste breath on the scale of death. They entered through fire. Cal's Thunderhawk rammed the breach after melter charges softened the hull, just as the combat projections had demanded. Around him, Atropos Terminators moved into Sentinel Sigma with the implacable heaviness of armored verdicts. Ancient Khalid came behind them, through a larger tear made by a boarding ram, his dreadnought body smashing aside warped plating as he entered. His sarcophagus bore the scars of wars older than most living chapters. His assault cannon spun up with a roar of awakened hate. "Forward," Cal voxed. No invocation, no speech, no comfort. The first corridor was already a tomb. Atmosphere vented through punctures in the hull, dragging corpses toward jagged rents, where they froze in contorted clusters. Blood globules drifted in red beads until they struck hot plating and hissed into steam. Traitor armsmen fired from pressure barricades, their boots mag-locked, their faces hidden behind cracked void visors. The Suns answered with storm bolters. Bolt shells detonated men into scraps that the failing atmosphere pulled apart. One defender was struck in the chest and burst so violently that his spine remained hanging from a restraint cable, while the rest of him painted the ceiling. Khaled advanced through their fire. Rounds hammered his sarcophagus and sparked from ancient plates. A plasma gun struck his left shoulder housing, slagging armor and boiling the paint from the chapter markings. He did not slow. His assault cannon cut the barricade into churning pieces. Men became red vapor. Gun shields shredded. A secessionist officer tried to crawl away with both legs missing, dragging himself through a trail of his own organs. Khaled stepped on him without looking down. Resistance cleared, the ancient intoned. "Path open," Naya confirmed. "Continue descent," Cal said. Sentinel Sigma fought them at every junction. Bulkheads slammed down to divide squads. Emergency turbines activated in maintenance shafts, pulling wounded armsmen and loose corpses into spinning blades. Cal saw mortal loyalist breachers dragged from cover one after another, their hands clawing sparks from the deck before the vent fans took them. Bodies struck the blades and came apart in sheets of meat and armor fragments. The turbines clogged. Then the pressure built and burst the vents outward, showering the corridor with chopped remains. A brother of Atropos, Brother Scythane, took a melter blast at close range when a hidden gun nest opened from behind a shrine panel. His torso plate sagged inward, white hot, and the flesh beneath cooked inside the armor. His life signs became a storm of red warnings. "Gene seed risk," Naya said. "Objective first," Cal replied. Scythane heard the order. He straightened, though the movement tore charred meat inside his plate, and fired until his storm bolter clicked. Empty. Then he drew a power fist through the melted remains of his armor seal and walked into the gun nest. By the time he stopped moving, the secessionists inside had been reduced to crushed helmets, ruptured torsos, and blood-slick weapon mounts. The apothecaries did not move for him. They moved only when Cal gave sanction. That sanction did not come. The fortress machine spirit screamed as they descended. It shrieked through vox grills in languages of pressure, heat, and failed loyalty. It tried to blind them with lumen bursts. It inverted gravity in a cargo descent well, hurling loyalist armsmen upward to break against the ceiling. It vented plasma wash through one corridor and welded traitor corpses to the walls in blackened silhouettes, their bones glowing for seconds beneath split armor. It flooded another passage with coolant so cold that mortal blood froze in open wounds before the dying men hit the deck. The Suns advanced through all of it. They fought in silence except for target callouts. Left aperture, servitor cluster, mine spine, Lascanon team, reactor wardens, kill confirmed. Each phrase was a bolt in the machine of war. No excess, no fear, no fury given voice. Cal's thoughts moved through objective layers, threat registers, and the cold presence of war spite burning somewhere behind every decision. The dead cruiser did not distract him. It refined him. Every enemy aboard Sentinel Sigma became an extension of the same debt. Every traitor body underfoot was interest paid against the larger sum. At the primary descent shaft, the secessionists counterattacked with their elite. They came in void-hardened plate, black and grey, carrying power axes, combi weapons, and oath banners scorched by loyalist fire. Combat servitors rolled before them on tracked units, rotary cannons spinning. Gun thralls chained into wall sockets opened fire as the Astartes entered, their human mouths stretched around scream gags, their ribs opened to cooling coils and ammunition feeds. The chamber filled with light, shrapnel, and bursting bodies. Ancient Khaled strode into the center. He took the full weight of the defensive fire. Armor plates cracked. One sarcophagus purity seal burned away. His right leg locked for half a heartbeat under Lascanon impact, then forced itself forward with a grinding roar. He fired point blank into the servitor line, shredding them into lubricant, bone, wire, and wet grey tissue. A secessionist veteran leapt onto his hull and drove a power axe into the sarcophagus front. Khaled seized the man in his claw and crushed him slowly enough that the armor split before the body did. Khaled, Calvoxed. Status: functional hatred remains. Mobility: insufficient for grace, adequate for murder. Advance: they broke the counterattack by refusing to acknowledge that it should have delayed them. Terminators pushed through the bodies. Devastator support teams reached the upper gallery and fired down into the defender ranks until nothing below could stand. Nair lost 2 fingers to a chain blade that bit through his gauntlet, then killed the wielder by forcing the same chain blade back through the man's face. Cal reached the vault door and drove his axe into the locking engine, while a tech marine burned sacred override code through the panel. The door opened onto the engine vault. Heat struck them like a living wall. The 5-meter plasma couplings rose from floor to ceiling, vast pillars of armored conduit feeding starfire into Sentinel Sigma's guns. Each coupling pulsed with blue-white radiance. The air shimmered. The deck vibrated beneath the rhythm of macro cannon discharge. Around the couplings stood the last defenders, elite infantry, chained gun thralls, corrupted servitors, and fortress officers whose faces had been burned clean of hope. They knew what the Sons had come to do. They had chosen to die near the heart. Cal entered first. A fortress officer raised a blade and shouted something about oaths. Cal shot him through the chest without slowing. The vault became close war. Terminators fought beneath the plasma light, their armor shining like bones under a dying sun. Khaled held the threshold as defenders tried to pour in behind them, his weapons firing until the assault cannon barrels glowed. Brother Scythane finally fell near the first coupling, his body collapsing against a mound of dead gun thralls. Only when his life signs ended did Cal mark him for recovery. Not before. The Tech Marine's voice cut through the vox. Severance points identified. Incorrect strike will overload chamber. Mark correct strike. Green runes appeared across Cal's display, each one fixed to a coupling brace thicker than a Land Raider's hull. He reached the first through a storm of fire. Plasma scorched his armor. Stubber rounds sparked from his helm. A combat servitor seized his axe arm with hydraulic claws. Cal headbutted the machine hard enough to crack its faceplate, then tore its arm out of the socket and drove the broken limb through its torso. He planted his boots before the coupling. The Omniscient axe rose. "Machine spirit of this fortress," Cal said over an open channel, his voice cold and half liturgical. "You served weakness. You will now serve silence." He struck. The axe's field bit into the severance point. The first coupling screamed in metal and contained starfire. Cal struck again. The brace split. Warning sirens howled through the vault. The second coupling took 3 blows. The third bled plasma through the wound and washed fire across his left side, stripping paint, cooking armor seals, burning what little organic skin survived beneath his collar. Pain registers flared and were suppressed. "Continue," he ordered himself. The fourth coupling ruptured outward, killing 2 defenders and 1 loyalist armsman who had crawled too close to the chamber edge. The fifth resisted until Khaled stepped beside Cal, battered and smoking, and locked his dreadnought claw around the weakened brace. "Together," the ancient said. Cal struck as Khaled tore. The final coupling severed. Sentinel Sigma's guns died. Across the void, loyalist ships surged forward as the ring of steel faltered. Defense batteries went silent in clusters. Void shield harmonics collapsed. Strike craft punched through gaps that had been death minutes before. Below, Badab Primaris lay exposed beneath the wounded fortress, its cloud cover lit by falling debris and the first true paths of invasion. Inside Sentinel Sigma, the Sons of Medusa seized command. There was no celebration. The fortress bridge was taken room by room, console by console, throat by throat. Surviving officers were interrogated until useful, then executed. Gun crews were burned in their pits. Corrupted servitors were dismantled or destroyed depending on reclamation value. The apothecaries moved at last, extracting gene seed from fallen brothers with reverent efficiency. Warspite's debt remained, but Sentinel Sigma had paid in blood and silence. Cal stood in the primary command vault, while Tech Marines chained the fortress machine spirit beneath loyalist control. Around him, bodies were being sorted. Brother from traitor, useful dead from waste dead, gene seed from meat, ammunition from debris. Nair approached, his damaged hand clamped and sealed. Fortress command is ours. Losses? Severe? Recoverable? Partially. Then recovery begins. And the unworthy? Cal looked through the armor glass toward Badab Primaris. The world below waited, stripped of its steel halo. Render them to ash. The order passed through Sentinel Sigma. Flamers spoke. Plasma furnaces opened. Execution shots cracked in sealed corridors. The fortress that had anchored the Ring of Steel became a crematorium for its former masters. In orbit, the Loyalist fleet advanced. Sentinel Sigma had fallen. The Ring of Steel was shattered. Badab Primaris lay bare. The great rift split the heavens like a wound that could not clot. It burned across the firmament, where sane stars had once offered navigation and false comfort. It bled unreality into the void. It turned astropathic choirs into screaming pyres, drowned worlds in demonic night, severed fleet from fleet, and prayer from answer. In its shadow, the Imperium did not die. It did what it had always done. It bled, lied to itself, counted the dead too slowly, and demanded more bodies for the next line. Tylus received the news without mourning. Every asteroid fortress in the system woke to war protocols. Void shields brightened over hollowed iron cores. Armories unsealed. Dreadnought sarcophagi pulsed with resurrected hate. Forged temples increased output until the reactor light turned the inner vaults green and white. The chamber ferrum stripped failed machine spirits from damaged hulls, broke them down in rite and code, and bound their remaining obedience into fresh weapons. Aspirants were removed from trial cycles early if they could carry ammunition, hold a blade, or become useful parts of the loading mechanisms. The galaxy was burning. That was not revelation. It was only confirmation. When Battle Group Gehenna of Indomitus Crusade Fleet Quartus entered the Tylus system, it came escorted by ships whose hulls bore scars from wars fought under skies torn by the rift. The fleet brought warriors, decrees, genecraft, armor patterns, sealed Martian caskets, priests with authority, warriors with new organs, and a word that had already begun to divide chapters across the Imperium: Primaris. The envoys expected resistance. Many chapters had given it. Some had called the new warriors miracle. Some had called them insult. Some had taken the gifts with gratitude while hiding resentment behind oath and hymn. The sons of Medusa did not greet the technology as miracle or insult. They greeted it as evidence. Iron Thane Valand Cal stood within the vault of surgical continuance as the caskets were opened. He had changed since Badab, but change among the sons was never restoration. He had lost flesh, gained iron, severed nerves, replaced failed systems, hardened his voice into a thing almost entirely stripped of organic resonance. His left arm was no longer merely augmetic. It was a relic of black adamantine and machine wrath. His spine housed logic stabilizers. His remaining organs were monitored by engines that tolerated them only because gene seed required living matter as vessel. Around him stood Morn Gravar, forge rites of the chamber ferrum, apothecaries, tech marines, and the silent hulks of aggressor squad Colgrim, awaiting rite of inspection. The new armor was heavier, broader, more brutally practical than much of the older plate. The new organs promised resilience. The new weapons promised weight of fire. The new genecraft promised correction. Correction was sacred. A Crusade Magos extended a data slate on a mechadendrite. The technology is delivered by command of the Lord Commander of the Imperium and sanctioned through the mechanisms of Mars. Cal did not reach for it. A serf took the slate and died 3 seconds later when its machine spirit rejected his implanted clearance brand. The body was dragged away. A second serf, more extensively augmented, accepted the slate without failure. "Compatibility?" Cal asked. "High," said the Forge Right. "Risks severe. Mortality expected among crossing subjects. Mortality is expected in all useful processes." The Magos' lenses tightened. "You accept without petition?" Cal looked at the caskets. The Moiraan calculations predicted refinement through exile, escalation through fracture, and survival through adaptation. This confirms trajectory. The Magos emitted a scrap of static that might have been distaste. "You interpret all things as validation." "No, only validated things." The Rubicon Primaris did not open like a gate. It opened like a wound made by willing hands. Cal was cut apart beneath lamps that burned white enough to make shadows flee from the surgical vault. His armor was removed in layers: plating, seals, subdermal anchors, reinforcement chains. The augmetic housings that had replaced so much of him were disconnected, severed, catalogued and suspended beside him, like relics taken from a battlefield corpse. What remained of his flesh lay exposed beneath the eyes of apothecaries and tech marines, pale, scarred, threaded with cables, more shrine component than man. The saws began their hymns. Bone was opened, organs were touched, judged, moved, threatened. New gene-wrought additions were inserted with the reverence of ammunition loaded into a sacred weapon. His blood was drained, filtered, enriched, and returned under pressure. His heart spasmed against command drugs. His lungs filled with fluid and were forced to breathe through pain. His muscles tore as new growth demanded space inside a frame already rebuilt by iron. Auto-sanguinary systems shrieked warnings. Logic engines tried to stabilize nerve storms that would have killed a lesser warrior before the first hour ended. Cal did not scream. A scream was information without use. For a time, he died. The machines recorded it. The apothecaries refused it. The tech marines threatened his augmetics back into function with binharic lashes and voltage. His remaining flesh convulsed. His new organs awakened one by one, like weapons chambers cycling live rounds. When his eyes opened, one organic and one lens, the surgical vault recognized him as alive by a narrow margin. Alive was an imprecise word. Functional was better. He rose from the slab taller, broader, heavier, his transhuman frame expanded and brutalized by the crossing. The Rubicon had not restored him. It had not healed the old wounds of exile, Badab, Warspite, Bellwrath, Moiraan, or Medusa. It had not made him less monstrous. It had upgraded the monster. Morn Gravar crossed after him and survived. That mattered. Gravar had long been used as proof within the chapter that will, iron, and calculation could force flesh to obey beyond its natural limitations. His crossing into Primaris form made him larger and more terrible, but not softer. His augmetics were not removed in shame. They were reinforced, integrated, and sanctified anew. Where new tissue could serve, it was permitted. Where iron served better, iron remained. The lesson passed through Tylus faster than any sermon. The new technology had not weakened the chapter's hatred of flesh. It had sharpened it. Voluntary amputations increased after the first successful crossings. Brothers who had received new strength offered up healthy limbs to prove that improvement did not excuse dependence. Aspirants watched Primaris organs implanted beside augmetic sockets and learned the same doctrine in a new form. Flesh could be made stronger. Flesh could be refined. Flesh could be used. It still failed. War came before debate could become indulgence. The Great Rift had torn the Imperium into bleeding halves. Chaos advanced across ruptured routes and dead sectors. Mordian was under siege, its iron discipline tested beneath demonic assault and traitor invasion. Across the wider warfront, the Iron Hands gathered with their successors in a crusade of cold survival and machine wrath. The sons of Medusa answered not as prodigals seeking forgiveness, and not as kin seeking embrace. They answered as correction arriving late enough to be severe. The war zone spread across multiple worlds, void corridors and orbital graveyards. Billions moved through it. Astra Militarum regiments marched beneath skies broken by warp storms, ranks upon ranks of men in greatcoats, rebreathers, flak plate, and fear. Night households strode through the ash with banners snapping and chain blades roaring. Mechanicus maniples advanced in red cohorts, Skitari firing in perfect volleys, while Cataphron engines crushed the wounded beneath their treads. Titans walked like judgment engines, their void shields catching artillery fire, their god voices flattening city districts. Void fleets clashed above, lances cutting through debris fields, escorts dying by the dozen, troop ships spilling burning men into the dark. Chaos came against them in unclean multitudes. Traitor guardsmen charged behind banners made from skin and rusted aquilae. Heretic Astartes moved like old sins in corrupted plate, their weapons snarling with demonic hunger. Demon engines crawled over manufactorum ruins, part tank, part beast, part furnace, their mouths vomiting flame and scrap code. Warp things danced where artillery tore open reality. Cultists ran ahead of the main lines in oceans of filth and prayer, begging their gods to notice the exact instant of their deaths. The sons of Medusa did not deploy as saviors. Their first act was triage. Worlds were sorted, defendable, recoverable, expendable, irrelevant. Strongholds were reinforced where survival fed future victory. Weak fronts were abandoned if holding them consumed more strength than their preservation justified. Populations were assessed by labor value, strategic position, contamination risk, and obedience probability. Priests protested, governors threatened, guard officers begged for more time. The sons answered with movement orders, execution warrants, bombardment coordinates, and silence. On Carthax Meridian, Cal ordered 3 refugee continents denied evacuation after plague signs appeared in the lower hives. Orbital fire burned the ports before infected masses could reach the transports. On Bellona's ash, Gravar reinforced a fortress line by stripping armor from 2 civilian arcologies and leaving their inhabitants exposed to the storm. On Mordian's outer relief corridor, Lachesis pursuit cadres hunted traitor command cells through dead trench cities and returned with heads, codes, and no prisoners worth feeding. Then came the battle beneath the broken sky of Vorras Plain. The plain had once been an ocean bed. Now it was a continent of cracked salt, corpse mud, wrecked armor, and shattered shrine spires. Above it, the sky was split by the rift's light, red and violet and black, crawling with shapes that might have been clouds or the undersides of impossible beasts. The armies met across a front wider than some nations. Aggressor Squad Colgrim walked with Cal at the center of the sun's advance. They were living siege engines, each warrior huge in gravis plate, fists built around boltstorm gauntlets and flame projectors, ammunition feeds chained across their armor like devotional iron. Their sergeant Colgrim had replaced both eyes, one lung, half his jaw, and the entire left side of his torso after the Rubicon crossing. His voice was a bass growl flattened by Vox discipline. Beside them moved the servitor designated Mortis. Once, the thing might have been a man. Now it was a hunched machine slave with a reinforced spine, cranial casing, ammunition limbs, and a Vox grill that whispered targeting confirmations in broken Binharic. Its designation had once been rendered in crude alphanumeric glyphs by the Chamber Ferrum, but Cal spoke it only as Mortis. It carried additional ammunition for the aggressors and a reliquary of spare targeting nodes. It did not fear. It did not ask why the world burned. It followed. Ahead, the Chaos line surged. Demon engines came first, brass-jawed and smoke-crowned, crushing cultists beneath their tracks as they charged. Behind them ran traitor infantry in dense masses, screaming names that curdled the air. Heretic Astartes followed in disciplined knots, old monsters beneath warped helms, firing bolters whose shells screamed with bound spite. Above, Helldrakes tore through the smoke and spat fire across Imperial armor columns. A Baneblade exploded to Cal's left, its turret lifting into the air on a pillar of flame before crashing down into a company of guardsmen. Men burst like insects beneath its fall. Cal advanced through the rain of burning steel. Colgrim, he voxed, left demon engine, close-range saturation. By your will, Iron Thane. The aggressors opened fire. Their Boltstorm gauntlets turned the charging cultist screen into spray. Bodies disintegrated in strips, torsos rupturing, legs continuing forward for a step before falling. Flamestorm weapons washed the survivors in promethium, and men became running candles, their mouths open, their lungs cooking inside their ribs. The demon engine behind them smashed through the fire, its front armor engraved with screaming faces that moved beneath the metal. Cal met it head-on. The engine's cannon fired at point-blank range. The shell struck his left side and detonated, throwing him back 3 paces, cracking armor and bursting warning runes across his vision. His upgraded body absorbed what the old might not have. His augmetics locked. His new organs flooded strength into torn muscle. He crossed the distance before the engine could fire again and drove his omniscient axe into the joint beneath its jaw. The demon engine screamed. Not metal, not flesh. Something imprisoned. Cal wrenched the axe free and struck again. Colgrim's squad closed around him, firing into exposed workings, ripping armor loose with powered fists, burning the thing's inner meat with flame. Mortis crawled beneath the engine's flank and attached melter charges with calm mechanical precision. The servitor lost one arm to a snapping cable maw and did not pause. It armed the charge with its remaining limb and dragged itself clear on broken tracks. The detonation opened the demon engine from within. Warp fire howled out. Black blood and molten brass flooded the ground. A nearby guardsman looked at Cal as if seeing judgment made flesh, then died when a shard of possessed metal cut him in half. Cal did not look down. Across the entire front, billions fought and died. Titans traded fire with demon engines large enough to crack mountains. Night lances charged through cultist oceans, their chain blades throwing red arcs into the sky. Mechanicus maniples marched into radioactive fog and did not return. Iron Hand's battle groups burned through traitor armor with cold precision. Sons of Medusa armor, spearheads punched through collapsing sectors, not to rescue the trapped, but to amputate the infection before it reached stronger lines. The Vox net filled with appeals. Civilian mass approaching breach point. Abandon. Guard regiment encircled, requesting extraction. Deny. Mark artillery. Shrine City still contains relic population. Assess relic value. Unknown. Then no value. Heretic armor breaking through western ash flats. Redirect Atropos. Kill engines first, flesh later. A priest on the common Imperial channel called them heartless. Cal heard it. He answered on an open vox band, not for the priest, but for every son of Medusa fighting beneath the broken sky. Mercy is an organic error. Fear is an organic error. Weakness is an organic error. Correct them. The words crossed the war zone in iron clarity. Sons of Medusa heard and obeyed. Atropos Terminators teleported into the heart of a heretic artillery park and tore the crews apart before turning the guns on their former masters. Megara Devastators held a ridge of corpse salt against 3 assaults, their heavy weapons firing until barrels split and serfs burned their hands replacing them. Lachesis Hunters collapsed a traitor retreat corridor with mines, melter traps and orbital coordinates, trapping an army between advancing loyalist armor and their own panic. Dreadnoughts strode through flame with sarcophagus voices chanting kill tallies. Primaris brothers, old-born veterans, servitors, tech marines and iron dead moved as one machine. The chaos line broke before dusk, though dusk meant little beneath a sky that had forgotten natural light. The traitors did not flee all at once. Some died where they stood. Some were trampled by their own demon engines. Some ran toward the warp glow, laughing, weeping, or tearing at their faces. The sons pursued only as far as efficiency allowed. Extermination was desirable. Overextension was weakness. Cal halted the advance at the edge of the dead manufactorum belt and ordered artillery to finish what distance made inconvenient. The guns spoke until the horizon stopped moving. Afterward, the plain belonged to corpses and machines. There were so many dead that the ground had lost its color. Human, mutant, Astartes, Xenos mercenary, demon thing, servitor, Skitari, guardsman, cultist, priest, noble, serf, engine crew, and nameless meat lay together in layers. Burning tanks sank slowly into mud made from blood, oil, and ash. Night wrecks knelt like executed kings. Demon engines twitched in death, their inner fires guttering. Servo skulls drifted over the field marking gene seed, salvage, contamination, and ammunition recovery. Mortis crawled beside Cal on repaired limbs, dragging a chain of empty ammunition canisters. Morn Gravar joined him near the corpse of a fallen Titan's hand. The dead god engine's fingers were large enough to shelter a platoon. Now they were half buried beneath bodies. "Objective achieved," Gravar said. "Temporarily," Cal replied. "The Iron Hands acknowledge our contribution." Logged. The Mechanicus requests access to demon engine remains. Permit supervised extraction. Deny unsanctioned data removal. Civilian authorities request relief allocation. Assess labor viability first. Gravar looked across the plain. His green lenses reflected fire and the torn heavens. The rift continues to widen. All wounds invite infection. And correction. Cal turned toward the far horizon, where the next front burned. His armor was cracked. His upgraded organs labored within cages of iron and gene craft. His augmetics clicked through repair cycles. Blood that was still partly human moved through systems that no longer respected humanity as an ideal. Around him, the sons of Medusa reformed their lines. They did not roar. They did not exult. They did not kneel in gratitude or pray for forgiveness over the dead. They counted ammunition. They recovered gene seed. They rendered the unworthy to ash. They calculated the next purge.